Hey folks, want to know more about this guy, and this guy, and these gentlemen, and her, and him, and what's going on here, and this place, and this, and that? Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Johnny Vector, Sonic the Hedgehog fan, Gex fanatic, Wario Land connoisseur, but today, I'm here to talk to you about Fleetway's Sonic the Comic. You might have heard of Fleetway before, or seen it referenced on Twitter or whatever. You might think this guy is called Fleetway. Well, let's clear one thing up. Fleetway is a company, and it published Sonic the Comic here in the UK in the 1990s. The comic book had a profound impact on me, and ultimately, that's why I'm here today, to share with you my passion for Fleetway's Sonic the Comic. In the 1990s, I was obsessed with the Mega Drive Sonic games. I'd play them again and again, but honestly, Sonic the Comic's interpretation of Sonic and his world cemented my lifelong love of the Hedgehog. There's something about the art, the writing, the dystopian world, the quirky characters, the memorable villains, the epic story arcs that I just adored about Sonic the Comic. For me, they nailed Sonic. And the thing is, reading Sonic the Comic actually made me enjoy the games more too. It recontextualized Sonic and Mobius and added a lot of extra flavor to the character and his universe that to this day continues to shape how I think about Sonic. I'm not here to convince you that Fleetway's Sonic, Robotnik or otherwise are the best versions of the characters, although thinking about it they probably are in my opinion. I'm just here to give you a full, thorough, guided tour of the world of Fleetway's Sonic the Comic. If you're a new fan, then welcome, you're in for a wild ride. If you're a Fleetway enjoyer already, then get ready for a lot of good memories and nostalgia to come flooding back. Before I dive in and start talking you through and analysing the comic's stories, its characters and the minds behind it, let me just say that this video is evidently a bit of a longie. I wanted to be thorough, hence the runtime, but this really is a labour of love. The intention here was to make the ultimate Fleetway tribute, and the ultimate guide to the world of Fleetway.
I have to finish the story.
But I have touched on a few topics before that I won't be broaching again here. For example, there'll be no discussion of the fierce Commander Brutus in this video. He's one of my favourite villains, but I've already done a video on him. Also, although I do touch on the common belief that Fleetway Sonic is a jerk, I've tackled this topic and tried to debunk it comprehensively elsewhere. For all of my Fleetway videos, I've made a handy playlist for you to peruse. Now with that out of the way, I hope you enjoy this, the video I've always wanted to make. This is absolutely everything there is to say about Fleetway's Sonic the Comic.
Let's go crazy!
First question to be answered is, what on earth is this Fleetway I keep referring to? Fleetway were a comic book company from the UK with a long and storied history. Although Fleetway had historically published original comics of their own, by the 1990s they were increasingly putting out comics based on licensed properties, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Mickey Mouse, etc. On the 29th of May 1993, after some promotion on TV and in major UK comic book 2000 AD, Sonic the Comic joined the ranks of Fleetway's licensed properties, hitting the shelves with a, honestly, atrocious looking cover. This was the perfect time for a Sonic comic to arrive here on the sunny shores of the UK. Sonic Mania. No, not that Sonic Mania, I mean the initial honeymoon phase the UK had with Sonic was still in full swing. Sega dominated the UK's console market. The success of Sonic 1 and 2 had turned the Blue Hedgehog into a household name, and over the next couple of years, the UK would enjoy a cavalcade of Sonic cartoons and games that would only grow Sonic's popularity. In short, this was when Sonic briefly ruled the world. Interestingly, there was a precedent for a Sonic comic.
Over the past couple of years, another publishing house, Grand Dreams, had put out year-end hardback Sonic yearbooks, featuring some fun little Warner Brothers inspired strips, worked on by future Sonic the Comic talent like Richard Elson. The actual year that these books were released has kind of been forgotten and is contested, but I needed to shout them out because I own one of these beauties. And I feel like I got it before Sonic the Comic started, but anyway.
Sonic the Comic ended up releasing 223 issues over the course of 9 years, so it was obviously a success. But that success wasn't necessarily a certainty. Licensed comics were a no-nonsense, lucrative market because licensed properties brought with them pre-existing fan bases, but historically, none of Fleetway's other licensed comics have enjoyed the same love nor longevity as Sonic the Comic. Fleetway pretty much ceased to exist in 2016, when their library was acquired, so I dare say Sonic the Comic might remain Fleetway's most enduring impact on the comic book industry. Guess what pops up when you Google search Fleetway? To be completely honest, the first year or so of the comic was a little rough, at least for Sonic the Hedgehog. The early Sonic strips employed loads of different artists and writers who filled the comic with throwaway, one-off stories that were often quite weak and disposable. The quality of the art in the early strips also varied dramatically depending on the artist.
Still, even in this early rough patch, Fleetway writers had some fun ideas that predated other forms of Sonic media.
Unlike most American comics, British comics tend to include 4 or 5 mini-strips per issue, and Sonic the Comic followed this format. In its early days, the other strips were made up of stories based on other Sega games, which were, ironically, a little more compelling and boasted superior art and writing to the Sonic stuff. It's also worth noting that Sonic the Comic was a kind of magazine in a sense as well, targeted at a young audience.
The comic also featured a letters page that often included some pretty snarky and nasty reader correspondence, a fan art page with art of varying quality,
it's the biggest piece of dog.
Pin-ups, free gifts like this nostalgia-inducing Goosebumps sticker album,
as well as some fairly questionable reviews and some news pages which have been quite interesting to revisit.
I had no idea that Ray appears in Sonic the Comic. Sega Sonic the Hedgehog is called Sonic the Coin-Op here.
The ultimate question, though, is when did the comic get good? I'd say issue 7 is a good starting point for a new reader. It's the first strip that combines the dream team of Nigel Kitching and Richard Elson, and it marks the debut of their twisted version of Super Sonic, a crazed, swirly-eyed, ultra-violent version of Sonic that seems to surface when he's under extreme levels of stress. Fortunately, this crazed version of Sonic usually subsides before he hurts his friends too much. This version of Super is Fleetway's first truly great idea, because it's a smart inversion of how Super Sonic usually works, offering a definitive downside to Sonic's otherwise awesome supersonic transformation. Obviously, next is issue 8, which gives an overview of Sonic and Robotnik's origins and sets the tone for the future of the comic, as the Freedom Fighters find themselves transported to a future where Robotnik has successfully taken over Mobius, setting the scene for the next nearly 100 issues. From this point, the stories and tone would steadily become more substantial and more consistently good. Undoubtedly, my favourite story of Sonic the Comic's early years starts in issue 18. We find the Casino Night Zone under the management of a trio known as the Marxio Brothers, a portmanteau of the Mario Brothers and the Marx Brothers, a reference that surely went over the head of most young readers. The comic released at the height of Sega and Nintendo's animosity, so the trio are a cheap jab at Mario and Luigi. Even though they're video game stars on Mobius, they're sleazy, they love cigars, and they've rigged the zone to steal Mobian's money. That is, until Sonic turns up to change the Marxio brothers' fortunes. I'm happy to say, this isn't the last time we'll see these three. They will return. But this strip is a great microcosm of what makes Fleetway great. It adds some flavour to Casino Night Zone, the art is stellar, the colours are luscious, the Moxio brothers are fun, original characters, and it makes for a great read. In the comic's earliest days, Fleetway staff found it tricky to work with Sega and make compelling stories and characters that fit Sega's stringent guidelines. But the editorial team stepped in and helped gain the team more creative freedom, which I think really helped the comic find its unique personality.
They had to approve everything because it was a licensed title. We had to pay them for the right to use their character, and so you're not working freely like, say, the editor of 2000 AD, where you're the editor, do what you want. I had restrictions, but my point was, if you want this comic put out, you can't keep stalling us at every point because you'll never get the comic published. You know, you've put us in this position, and you have to trust our experience. You know, we're not gonna be supplying you with, you know, dodgy scripts and dodgy artists. So unless there's anything that you really object to, well, basically, can you please let's do our job? And they were brilliant, actually. They gave us a lot of freedom.
By the time the comic's first major story arc kicked off in issue 23, things were really in full swing. Before we talk about that though, let's deep dive into a few more particular topics. I want to talk characters, I want to talk places, I want to talk themes, I want to talk behind the scenes. Let's go! Let's talk about the origin story of the comic's two most important characters, Sonic and Dr. Robotnik. You might find it to be a surprisingly familiar tale. The two met long ago, when Robotnik was known by another name. He was known as a kindly and significantly less rotund doctor called Ovi Kinterbor, and Sonic was a more conventional-looking brown hedgehog. By the way, this is the first and last explicit pronunciation warning in this video. I say Kinterbor, my buddy says Kintober. Who knows? Kinterbor is a benevolent, kind-hearted genius, and he was on a quest to rid planet Mobius of evil by trying to use the Chaos Emeralds to absorb said evil. When Sonic and Kinterbor first met, he'd successfully collected 6 Chaos Emeralds, and Sonic was already boasting that he was the fastest hedgehog on Mobius. Sonic and Kinterbor brokered a deal. Kinterbor required the elusive 7th Chaos Emerald. Sonic vowed to find it. In return, Kinterbor helped Sonic to unleash his true potential and run even faster. It was Kinterbor who designed Sonic's iconic power sneakers. The sneakers gave Sonic an immense speed boost, to the extent where he hit 761 miles per hour on a treadmill-type device, breaking the sound barrier, causing a small explosion in Kinterbor's lab and turning him blue. One fateful day, fancying a snack, Kinterbor retrieved a rotten egg from the fridge, and carrying it rather precariously, tripped and fell over a rogue wire, breaking the Chaos Emerald containment machine. The deadly mixture of unleashed chaos energy and the rotten egg caused Kinterbor to transform and be consumed by evil, resulting in the birth of Dr. Robotnik. The name Ivo Robotnik is obviously just a flipped version of Ovi Kinterbor. It's that old Dracula/Alucard trick. If this all sounds familiar, it's because it was the origin story as written in the so-called Sonic Bible, an internal document written by Sega of America. The origin story is completely divorced from Sonic's Japanese origins and didn't end up being used in the game series at all, but it was evidently offered up by Sega to Fleetway's writers as an origin story, and they ran with it. Now, after the transformation, Kinterbor does continue to exist in the comic as a benevolent computer program that helps the freedom fighters out. Fleetway Robotnik, on the other hand, is a being of pure evil and malice. He's an oppressive, violent, and psychotic villain, and Fleetway's Robotnik might be the scariest incarnation of Robotnik in any form of media. When he takes on the role of Mobius's dictator, he rules with an iron fist, ready to pollute the planet, steal every community's resources, and introduce a 1984-style police state. Really though, it's his look that seals the deal on the scary factor. Visually, Robotnik starts off with his classic in-game look, but later hatches from a rotten egg and assumes his most iconic look, inspired by the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog design. While Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog is goofy, Fleetway Robotnik is straight up intimidating. Richard Elson gave Robotnik a bit of a bulging, hulking physique. Robotnik's weight is played for laughs in the comic, but you get the impression that he's a pretty hench dude. In the latter days of the comic, he does have a couple of other costume changes, and he always looks good. Let's face it, Robotnik rocks every outfit he's in.
Oh no, he's hot!
As for Sonic, his character remains largely consistent through the comic. He's cocky, confident, and perhaps a little arrogant. Some early writers were a little heavy-handed with Sonic, portraying him as a bit of a try-hard and painting him as stereotypically cool in a very 1990s way.
No! He was supposed to have attitude!
What do you mean exactly?
Oh, you know, attitude! The sunglasses!
Can we put him in more of a hip-hop context?
Forget context. He's got to be a surfer. Give me a nice schmear of surfer.
I feel we should Rastify him by 10% or so.
I think he needs a little more attitude.
Oh yeah, bingo. There it is, right there. That's it.
I love it.
I've touched on this before and discussed at length the topic of whether it's fair to call Fleetway Sonic a jerk in another video, so I won't retread that discussion here, except to say that yes, Sonic can be quite rude to friends and enemies alike. I can look past his abrasive side, because most British comic characters are similarly asshole-ish, and Sonic at the very least does grow as a character and matures a bit as the comic goes on. A key thing to add is that Fleetway Sonic does have an innate heroism. It's in his nature to stop Robotnik, to save Mobius, and to do the right thing. His boisterous personality just makes him a superstar, and actually an inspirational face of the resistance against Robotnik. Being the hero is a heavy responsibility to bear, but Sonic pulls it off. You can excuse him for venting every now and then at his friend's expense. One final thing I always liked about Sonic was the fact that, more often than not, he relies on his speed to get him out of trouble. It sounds kind of obvious, but I think it's commendable that Sonic's speed plays a central role in so many strips. Sonic is unique in the Fleetway comic, as no one else can hold a candle to Sonic speed-wise. It really makes Sonic feel special. It's his ability, but it's something that the games had to kind of concede for the sake of playability. Playing the games, Sonic is really just one of an ever-growing list of heroes and villains who can run at the speed of sound. But in Fleetway, that's a protected trait. Sonic genuinely is the fastest thing alive. Step aboard, ladies and gentlemen, on this express monorail tour of Planet Mobius. Keep your hands and feet inside the vehicle at all times, as I try and give you a rough idea of what Fleetway's Mobius was like. Mobius in Sonic the Comic is a fantastical world that's split into lots of different zones. There are some, like the rather unimaginatively named Pleasant Zone, that are original to the comic, but there's an awful lot that originate from the games as well. The game that exerted the most influence over Sonic the Comic was Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Off the top of my head, I think we got to see all of the zones in Sonic 2 appear in the comic at one point or another. It feels like each zone is given an extra sprinkle of personality that helps to contextualize Sonic's world. Weirdly, Green Hill Zone doesn't feature prominently in the comic. This might be good news for fans suffering from Green Hill fatigue. Instead, Sonic's base of operations and the central hub of Mobius's peaceful animal residence is Emerald Hill Zone. Emerald Hill is the one area Robotnik fails to conquer, but so desperately wants to, and as a result, he retains a seething hatred of the Emerald Hill folk. A less friendly Sonic 2 zone that features heavily is Chemical Plant Zone. It's a horribly industrial zone, and the pink liquid from the game is given an elaborate origin story. It's a substance called Megamac, designed specifically with the aim of poisoning Sonic. There's even a villain, Megatox, a former scientist, who, due to a lab accident, is made entirely out of Megamac. Chemical Plant Zone is a continual menace in the comic. Its toxic pollutants cause havoc on Mobius, and in one strip, we see the rise of some bizarre, genetically modified crops, mutated by runoff from the zone. Then, you've got Casino Night Zone, which is run by a parade of nefarious slime balls. Again, it's recontextualized as an utterly sinister zone, built either to extract money from unwitting Mobians, or even worse, as a thinly veiled front for mass robotization. Robotization, maybe? One of my favourite zones in the early comic is Aquatic Ruins Zone, protected by a giant stone golem, who simply crumbles to pieces when he realises the civilization who built him is long gone. The final zone worth a specific mention is Metropolis Zone, the urban hub of Mobius. Although it has plenty of ordinary Mobians living there, it's also the home of Citadel Robotnik, and serves as the capital of Robotnik's empire. Of course, Mobius is very much shaped by the comic's artists. I think Richard Elson best encapsulated the Sonic the Comic Mobius that I like. It's half green and pleasant, and half Blade Runner dystopia. Who lives on Mobius? Well, the answer to that varies again artist by artist. Most artists opted to fill Mobius with anthropomorphic animals, though what animal many of the side characters are meant to be is questionable. Some border on being outright human, but they're not. Some artists went down the cuddly route, either filling Mobius with critters from the game, or with every other animal under the sun, making it feel like a delightful open-air zoo. One criticism I've seen of Fleetway is the inconsistency of the comic's world. There's so many tonal and artistic shifts and so many oddly designed characters that don't look like they should exist in the same universe. Honestly, I think the inconsistency is a huge part of the comic's charm. Then there's Mobius's robotic inhabitants. Outside of the standard badniks, Robotnik has multiple other classes of robot. Most prominent are the troopers, human-sized robots with guns, military-style uniforms, and soulless, tusked faces. They're genuinely intimidating guys, and they wouldn't look out of place in 2000 AD or heck, Warhammer 40k. They're the equivalent of Archie's SWAT bots, but I much prefer them. I think that's one of the key points about Fleetway. They did make lots of Robotnik's creations look threatening. These guys look so sinister, I wonder if they ever look in the mirror and have an existential crisis.
Hans, are we the baddies?
Now, really quickly, let me introduce you to the other important location in Sonic the Comic, the Special Zone. The Special Zone is a gigantic alternate dimension that Mobians can use as a kind of warp pipe, if they're fast enough to utilise a lamppost scattered across Mobius. Indeed, in its first appearance, that's all the Special Zone was, a weird abstract transportation system, but it soon took on a life of its own. Playing off the obscure nature of the zone in the games, the Special Zone became a vast expanse of quirkiness, a place where random shapes and geometry floated in space, a zone inspired by Dormammu's domain, as illustrated by Steve Ditko in his memorable run on Doctor Strange. The Special Zone, as it turns out, is literally a whole universe of its own. The most prominent planet there, Mobius's twin, is Planet Meridian. Meridian and its capital New Tech City is inhabited again by anthropomorphic animals, but I get the feeling that the whole planet is a nod to superhero comics. More on that later. I'll be touching on some of these locales throughout this video, so that draws to a close our whistle-stop tour of the most important aspects of the world of Sonic the Comic. Okay, we've done Robotnik and Sonic. Let's talk about our first original exclusive Fleetway character, Robotnik's loyal assistant, Grimer. Grimer has no in-comic backstory to speak of, he just suddenly appears in issue 21 and sticks around, but his behind-the-scenes origin is quite interesting. Head writer Nigel Kitching originally intended to introduce Snively, of Satan and Archie comic fame, as Robotnik's assistant, but when he caught wind that he couldn't make use of Snively, he created his own assistant character, hence Grimer. He's effectively a derivative of Snively. His full name, by the way, is Grimer Wormtongue, yes, named after the Lord of the Rings character. Personality-wise, Grimer's main trait is loyalty. He remains loyal to Robotnik throughout the course of the comic, except for one minor betrayal, which happens right at the tail end of the comic, when Robotnik has gone full bonkers. It's more a reflection of Robotnik's madness than Grimer's disloyalty. Beyond that justifiable time, his loyalty doesn't waver, even when presented with ample opportunity to betray his master, which is quite commendable really. How does Robotnik repay this loyalty? Well, he doesn't abuse Grimer as much as other lackeys and villains, so I guess Grimer's getting a pretty good deal. Now, Robotnik is never affectionate towards Grimer though, that would be out of character. While Robotnik is an evil genius, I get the impression that he's actually surpassed by Grimer. That's never explicitly stated in the comic anywhere, but Grimer is responsible for a number of incredibly important badniks and inventions. Grimer even has a fairly strong track record against Sonic, successfully kidnapping him on more than one occasion. I think he has a better track record than Robotnik, come to think of it. You might be asking yourself an important question though. What is Grimer? I honestly always thought he was a shambling zombie, a reference to the way Igor is often presented in pop culture, but Kitching has stated he's some sort of reptile. He's one weird-looking reptile, but oddly there are a few Grimer-looking characters in the comic, suggesting that he's just one of a race of weird-looking lizards. For example, Grimer's cousin Slimy, who looks just like him, appears in one Tails strip. Slimy is jealous of Grimer and wants to take his role as Robotnik's assistant. There's also a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde inspired villain who goes by the name of Proctor Speckle, whose evil side is Mr. Fry, who looks suspiciously similar to Grimer, though he's a denizen of the Special Zone, an entirely different dimension.
I've been staring at this all day, I still don't get it.
Whatever the case, Grimer's motivation for aligning with Robotnik is never explored, but his appearance alone is enough to tell you that this guy is bad news, with his sneaky little eyes, bony skeletal fingers, crazy mad scientist hairdo, and cybernetic enhancements. He just looks the part of a sinister, snaky villain. Finally, before we move on to talk about the comic's first major story arc, let's talk about the Freedom Fighters, the group of heroes who follow Sonic's lead and fight alongside him. After issue 8, when Sonic and Co. are spat out in a future ruled over by Robotnik, the comic starts getting more interesting. The general theme of the comic from this point onwards is the ongoing back and forth battle between the dictator Robotnik and the rebellious team of freedom fighters who foil his plans time and again. Robotnik's rule over Mobius is repressive, but it's not total, as plenty of pockets of resistance exist, particularly in Emerald Hill Zone, and the freedom fighters are very much an inspirational focal point for the resistance. Their foremost member is, of course, Tails. Tails is another character who pops into the comic without explanation, appearing rather unceremoniously in a roboticized state in issue 2. He is, of course, Sonic's loyal and doting sidekick with the handy power of flight, but there's so much more to say about him than that. His backstory is revealed over time and it's not what you might expect. Tails is actually originally from a mysterious fantasy realm called the Nameless Zone, full of wizards, warriors and monsters, home to a kingdom of medieval foxes, fighting an endless war against a rival clan of goblins. Even being born into this weird world of monsters, Tails was bullied for having two tails by other foxes, a theme that has actually since cropped up again In his official Sonic Origins backstory, Tails proves his worth to his bullies by saving them from some bat monsters and discovers that he can use his two tails to fly. As an ambitious but naive youngster, he ends up travelling alone to the Emerald Hill Zone because, and I'm being serious, he believed it to be a zone literally paved with emeralds. When he arrives on Mobius, he almost instantly drowns, but is saved by Sonic and becomes his sidekick there and then. Tails is unassuming, shy, and often takes verbal abuse from Sonic, but he regularly and secretly disappears to go back to the Nameless Zone and have adventures. You see, Tails is a bit of a liar, and he sends letters home lying about his own adventures on Mobius, painting himself as the hero and Sonic as his sidekick, which results in the Nameless Zone elders bringing him back to engage in perilous quests. So the Archie comics famously had a bunch of bizarre echidna characters, but Fleetway has its own clan of weird medieval foxes, like the muscular hero Errol Blackthorn and his fiery little sister Moraine. As the comic goes on, Tails takes less trips back to the Nameless Zone, and he becomes a confident, independent hero on Mobius. How would I sum up Tails' Fleetway characterization? Well, for one thing, he's not this high IQ sidekick like in the games. Instead, he's a character who morphs from a bit of a bumbling, unconfident verbal punching bag into an admirable, street-smart hero, who later on is even entrusted by Sonic to man many solo missions.
Oh, that was uncalled for.
I can't move on without bringing up this one infamous Fleetway strip. In the strip, Tails happens upon a powerful unicorn called Forlock, who says he'll grant Tails one wish, ridding Mobius of Robotnik. Forlock tries to do this by trying to coerce Tails into assassinating Robotnik, JFK style. Tails is too pure of heart to go through with it though. It's not a great strip, and it flew over the head of many young readers, but it goes to show you that deep down, Tails is just a good old-fashioned goody two-shoes. So yeah, this is a strip based on the assassination of JFK, quite deep for a kid's comic. I wonder if the writers are trying to tell us something about political violence by putting Tails in the position of Lee Harvey Oswald. Is the subtext here that no matter how bad someone is, violence is never the answer? I don't know.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
The other two key members of the Freedom Fighters are Porker Lewis and Johnny Lightfoot. These two fellas are actually introduced in the very first issue as critters, based on Picky and Pocky from Sonic the Hedgehog, so they predate Tails in the comic by one issue. At first, Johnny and Porker are just helpless animals, fodder to be saved by Sonic, but they quickly grow into unique characters. So, Porker Lewis, he's Sonic the Comic's technical genius. Presented as being kindly but very naive and a little cowardly, Porker is a key ally of Sonic's, thanks to his amazing engineering skills. Porker excels as the mechanical master of the group, contributing contraptions and inventions that are instrumental in defeating or weakening some of Sonic's most significant foes. The visual evolution of Porker is quite funny. In his first appearance, he's a cute little pig all naked and pink, but in issue 18 he dons his most iconic outfit, sporting a trendy leather jacket with a big Sonic patch on the back. He still has his trotters at this point. Later, Porker becomes even more anthropomorphic, with jeans, sneakers, and human-like hands instead of trotters. It's like watching evolution in real time. Porker has some surprisingly deep character development in the comic. Porker's kidnapped by a group of scary baddies during one of the comic's most prominent sagas. He's rescued, but the experience changes him permanently. Porker actually retires from the Freedom Fighters after this, having been traumatized. An unempathetic Sonic gives him a really hard time about it and reduces him to tears, but ultimately comes to terms with his decision. Porker relocates to the floating island to help Knuckles look after the Chaos Emeralds, and he spends his time trying to decode the mysteries of the Echidnas, leaving the Freedom Fighters behind because of his PTSD. Final note, later in the comic it's revealed that Porker is not from Mobius but actually from the Special Zone, and his real name is Oscar the Pig. He's actually a fugitive who fled the Special Zone because he owes some powerful mobster-type people money. Of course, no one truly believes that Kindly Porker is a criminal, but it's true. As we find out, Porker was hired by a crime lord and was duped into using his technical expertise to develop a bomb that he destroyed before fleeing to Mobius. Who'd have thought that Porker had such a seedy past? Then we have my namesake, Johnny Lightfoot. Like Porker, he started off as a mere critter, but then he gained a cool new look with a red leather jacket and a big metal staff to smash badniks with. He has a strong look, but I hate to say this, he's one of the least memorable characters in the comic. There's not really much to say about him, beyond being a generic do-gooder, but sometimes you need some good, solid guys to fill the ranks, I guess. The writers often teetered on the verge of giving Johnny more to do, but never really pulled the trigger on any of their ideas. For example, it was teased early that Johnny might have a little crush on Amy, which might lead to a love triangle of sorts, but that concept was dropped immediately. And yeah, that's Johnny. The Freedom Fighters are a cool team, but I always loved one aspect of the team in particular. When Robotnik takes over the planet, they assume the guise of a travelling circus complete with costumes and pseudonyms, roaming Mobius undetected in a rustic-looking caravan. It's a fun, colourful idea, and allows them to travel around Mobius without arousing suspicion. Sonic assumes the identity of Bob Beakey, a penguin. A final note on the Freedom Fighters, Sally Acorn, a beloved member of the Archie Comics Freedom Fighters, does appear in the Fleetway comics. She was originally a little critter, and then later, she's seen working as a news broadcaster on television. Ultimately, she's a footnote character, but still pretty cool to know that she exists in the Fleetway universe. Sonic the Comic has a number of identifiable story arcs that tend to last for about 10 or so issues apiece. These stories often take breaks from themselves, pausing for some filler issues before carrying on. The first notable long-form story is the comic's Sonic CD adaptation. The arc starts with Amy getting kidnapped, a common occurrence in the early years. She's kidnapped by, no, not Metal Sonic, hold your horses. First, she's kidnapped by Captain Plunder and his merry band of sky pirates that hang out in the Mystic Cavern Zone. To be fair to Amy, she gets herself out of this mess by suggesting the pirates and freedom fighters join forces, as they both want the Chaos Emeralds and don't want them to fall into the hands of Dr. Robotnik. So, the two sides team up to kick the ass of some goonies of Robotnik. But naive Porker lets slip that the freedom fighters do have control of the emeralds, and they're hiding them in a secret location, the Frozen Zone, so Plunder and his motley crew get away with the emeralds. But when Sonic goes to get them back, he finds that the emeralds have absorbed Captain Plunder's crew's evil vibes, rendering them harmless hippies. While Sonic is feuding with Plunder, Grimer and Robotnik test and unleash METALLIX, aka Metal Sonic, on Mobius. How awesome does he look? By the way, I'm not sure why they went with the name METALLIX, or is it METALLIX, rather than Metal Sonic, or maybe Mecha Sonic, but it's got a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah! Exterminate!
The story arc officially begins with Amy getting kidnapped again, this time by METALLIX, out near the Miracle Planet. The Miracle Planet in the comics is a small microplanet that only briefly appears over Mobius for one day every month. It's been completely roboticized and chained to Planet Mobius by Robotnik. Sonic finds out about Amy's kidnapping when his video game session is interrupted. So, Sonic heads to the Miracle Planet to take on METALLIX. In their first scuffle on Mobius' surface, Sonic gets the upper hand over METALLIX, thinking the robot defeated, but METALLIX reboots and takes Amy over onto the Miracle Planet itself. Here, METALLIX has a huge advantage because he's able to utilize the mechanized Miracle Planet itself as a power source. This is where things get a little funky. Sonic is saved from a METALLIX beatdown by a mini version of himself. from the future, who proceeds to convince present Sonic to shrink himself down and hands him the Time Stone. Present Sonic runs fast enough to visit the Miracle Planet's past, where it's all nice and green. There, he destroys Robotnik's machine and travels back to the future, or the present, I guess. There, he helps another Sonic in his fight with METALLIX and hands the Time Stone over. So yeah, we're trapped in a kind of endless time loop here. It's best not to think too hard about it. Because he destroyed the machine in the past, slowly but surely, the Miracle Planet becomes more green and METALLIX simply pops out of existence. As you can see, it was a fairly faithful adaptation, integrating some of the key story points from Sonic CD. The only thing that feels odd is the Time Stone. It was never used again, which is probably for the best because time travel stories and time travel mechanics can get a little tiresome when they're overused in comics. Final note on this arc, what I always found especially strange is the Time Stones are preemptively introduced a few issues earlier, and there's a bunch of them. Only one features in the actual arc. I guess that simplifies the story a bit, and there's already enough Chaos Emerald antics going on that the comic didn't need more MacGuffins, let's face it. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Captain Plunder and his crew of sky pirates. Plunder visually reminds me of Grimer, only in the sense that it's hard to pin down exactly what he's meant to be. He has an orcish look about him, though this design sketch of the captain describes him as having gorilla-type features with tusks, kind of like a yeti, I guess. Plunder is great because he reminds me of the totally whimsical side of Sonic the Comic. I mean, after playing the first two Mega Drive games, who'd think to introduce the concept of marauding sky pirates to the Sonic franchise? So popular was Plunder with the fanbase that he was one of the comic's first original characters to be granted his own strip. Despite looking quite intimidating, Plunder's a bit of a comedy character. His schemes are always bubbling with greed and Machiavellian plans, but they never seem to pan out at all. Alignment-wise, Plunder and his crew are neutral, working most of the time with the goal to enrich themselves, whether that means working with or against the Freedom Fighters, or indeed Dr. Robotnik. Of note among Plunder's motley crew is Filch, a reptilian ghost with a giant hole in his head. Wanna know how he got that scar? Well, he was shot during an argument with Captain Plunder over the last of a packet of biscuits. In one strip of note, Plunder is caught trying to steal from Dr. Robotnik and sent to jail. There, he meets a future permanent member of his crew, Simpson the Cat. Simpson is just brilliant. He's a physics-defying, toon logic character inspired by Rubber Hose animation. Plunder's crew is in disarray. They're just as chaotic as the Straw Hat Pirates. Plunder is worth a mention because he's a great example of an original character being deployed very gracefully throughout the comic to forward certain storylines in a natural way. Pirates and Sonic might not seem like a comfortable or obvious fit, but at the end of the day, introducing Amy and having her kidnapped prior to the kickoff of the Sonic CD arc felt like a solid idea, allowing the audience some time to get to know her before her more serious kidnapping by Metal Sonic. Basically, Ken Penders should take note. Captain Plunder is how you pull off integrating an original character into a Sonic comic. In a later comic, Plunder breaks into the tomb of an ancient, powerful being and is cursed with bad luck for the remainder of his life. I adore all of these scenes of Plunder's luck running out. His luck really reaches rock bottom. He's bullied by more experienced pirates. He's very nearly eaten by a great white shark. And in one panel, deserted on a tiny desert island with nobody but Simpson to accompany him, a lone coconut falls on the captain's head. What more could go wrong for the bumbling Captain Plunder? Around the time of the Sonic CD arc, we get introduced to Amy Rose. Amy actually first appears in the comic in a preview for Sonic CD in a very early issue. Now, one of the most distinct things about Fleetway's version of Amy is her hairstyle, with her quills all spiked up permanently. The theory is that the Fleetway artists based their version of Amy on this one piece of art, assuming her hair was always meant to be spiked up, which is quite a charming little misinterpretation. Early Fleetway Amy isn't dissimilar from her 1990s in-game persona. She's a bit of a typical girly girl, and she's more often than not a damsel in distress. As the comic went on, Amy's character grew, developed, and changed, perhaps even more dramatically than any of the other Freedom Fighters. After joining the Freedom Fighters, she started using a crossbow as her weapon of choice, which added a useful, previously missing long-range weapon to the Freedom Fighters' arsenal. She also became steadily more confident. It was quite interesting to see her evolve. In her first solo strip, she comes across as hesitant when faced with a gang of badniks. In a later strip, when Sonic advises her to run off solo, she's also very apprehensive. But with each mission, her acumen and certainty in herself grew, until eventually, in Sonic's absence, she took on the role of the de facto leader of the Freedom Fighters. This slow change was the brainchild of editor Deborah Tate, who was unhappy with Amy's original look and characterization, and wanted her to be a bolder, more interesting, and less stereotypically girly character.
Like, for example, the female character that was called Amy Rose, I looked at her, I thought for a start she looked like an utter grip, you know. So I said, well, would you have any objection if, you know, I got some of the artists to draw her looking differently and see what you think? And bingo, they said, yeah, go ahead. And then I briefed the writers, Nigel and Lou, and said, look, I want to like this. And then when the scripts would come in, I'd edit the dialogue to what I thought she should be saying. And considering the readership was sort of half female and half male, you know, she's just as popular with the boys as she was with girls, which was fantastic.
As Amy's personality changed, so did her look. She transformed from a typical girly girl to a bit more of a grungy persona, with plenty of t-shirts and plaid skirts. Amy's Fleetway look has become kind of iconic, and I have to say, it's one of the strongest redesigns Fleetway brought to the table. Ultimately, Tate disagreed with how Nigel Kitching had been writing Amy, resulting in Kitching dropping Amy from appearing in the main Sonic strip. Ironically, I think this move away from Sonic actually allowed Amy to further blossom. Her solo adventures and her strips with her buddy Tekno the Canary were often a little less high stakes than the comic's Sonic strip, but I always found this change of pace quite refreshing, and I enjoyed the level-headed duo of Amy and Tekno. Their friendship was lovely and endearing. Finally, let's talk romance. A key aspect of early comic Amy Rose is her relationship with Sonic. Amy evidently has a bit of a crush on Sonic and readily declares herself his girlfriend, much to Sonic's annoyance. You get the impression that Amy plays it up though, and kind of trolls Sonic a bit with her forwardness. As far as I can tell, latter comic Amy is independent, and she seems to have gotten over her feelings for Sonic. If we dare briefly discuss the topic of shipping, Amy and Tekno spent so much time together that many fans have since cast them as being a couple. As a kid, I never got that impression from the duo. There's nothing particularly flirty or romantic about their relationship. If we run Amy through the comparison machine, then we find a real clash of personalities. Sega of Japan have presented modern Amy in an increasingly girly, bubbly way that feels like the diametric opposite of Deborah Tate's vision for the character. I'm not a total modern Amy hater, but some of her characterization leaves a lot to be desired. I'd take Fleetway Amy over modern Amy any day. With the first major story arc discussed, This feels like a good point to take a quick interlude from talking about the comic's contents and take a look behind the scenes. Let's talk a little bit about the minds behind the comic. Over the course of the comic's lifespan, a multitude of writers worked on the comic, though two stand out as particularly important. In the comic's earliest years, though, a whole host of writers dipped in and out of the comic. For example, acclaimed comics legend Mark Millar, known for his impressive body of work which includes Superman Red Son, Marvel Civil War and Kick-Ass, penned some of the earliest Sonic the Comics stories. These strips are not Millar's best work. The strips are all largely disposable efforts with pretty lame one-off storylines and little in the way of world building or continuity. Millar's characterization of Sonic represents Fleetway Sonic at his absolute worst. A Poochie-esque caricature of a 1990s too cool for school type. It has to be said though that one particularly popular Millar strip has remained relevant. That is Extra Life, a throwaway strip that explores the one-up TV monitors that appear in all Sonic games. Extra Life is an evil clone of Sonic who's trapped in one of the TV monitors and freed by Tails. To be fair, it's a fairly interesting exploration of a benign concept in the games, but the story's prominence has been massively elevated by the character's popularity in the Friday Night Funkin' Sonic community. After the early years, the comic's two most prolific writers by quite a wide margin were Nigel Kitching and Lou Stringer. Kitching probably remains the comic's most acclaimed writer. Prior to his work on Sonic the Comic, Kitching had worked on a number of licensed comics, writing strips for properties like Red Dwarf, Looney Tunes, and Count Duckula. Kitching was evidently a malleable writer, and when he got the gig working on Sonic the Comic, he tried to bring a serious as opposed to humorous tone to the comic. This serious tone resonated with fans. Kitching strips were the first to introduce a sense of depth, ambition, atmosphere and continuity to the comic, and were usually front and center, the first and most prominent strips in the comic. And he's responsible for introducing more long-form, multi-part storytelling to the comic. His greatest feat, in my opinion, lies in his character work. For example, both Sonic and Knuckles experienced real growth and character development under Kitching's penmanship. Knuckles transformed from a grumpy recluse to being more open-minded, and Sonic from a bit of an abrasive asshole to a well-rounded, complex character with a tender side. Kitching's writing wasn't flawless, and by his own admission he wrote a few stinky strips. But hey, he's only human, after all. It is worth mentioning though that Kitching himself has credited the comic's original editor, Richard Burton, for coming up with a plethora of ideas that Kitching merely fleshed out. Burton had worked for Marvel UK and was in the middle of a long tenure as 2000 AD's editor when he took Sonic the Comic under his helm. So the comic really was in safe hands with Burton. Now Lou Stringer is the other Sonic the Comic writer worthy of legendary status. Stringer has had a long, storied career and extensive experience writing for British humour comics. Stringer contributed strips to comics like Acne and Buster, for example.
Hi, I'm Lou Stringer. I've been working in comics since 1983 professionally. I do humour stuff. I write and draw humour comics for things like The Beano. I've worked for Viz, The Dandy, Buster, Oink Comic, and I currently do a little mini strip in Doctor Who magazine every month. I think the creator I most admire was Leo Baxendale, who created the Bash Street Kids and Minnie the Minx in the 1950s. And then when I first saw his work in the 1960s, he was working on a comic called Wham! And his stuff was just insanely funny, and his style just set a stylistic look for comics all through the 1960s, really.
This background is important because Stringer approached Sonic the Comic with a bit of a lighter tone than Kitching, with his stories feeling more harmless, whimsical, and in line with contemporary British children's humour comics. Now, don't get me wrong, Stringer could and regularly did introduce some darker and more badass elements to the comic, but his lighter touch did help to show a friendlier and smaller scale side to Mobius that greatly enriched the world of the comic, beyond the grander scale stories of Kitching. Stringer's lighter stories really allowed Kitchen's more serious stories room to breathe. Stringer has stated that he thinks It's Raining Bananas is probably his favourite strip, but admits it probably wasn't too favourably received. The strip's fairly self-explanatory. It's about a deadly rain of bananas over Emerald Hill Zone, but it's told entirely in rhyme. I don't mind that strip, but I do take a tiny bit of umbrage with Stringer because occasionally he wrote a strip with unfortunate continuity issues. The worst offender is in issue 127, in a story that gives us some background on Amy Rose. Here she's just a normal brown hedgehog, looking to thwart a Robotnik plot. During her little skirmish, an explosion causes her to turn pink. While it's interesting to see a bit of Amy's background, the story kind of retcons her character by presenting her as a valiant hero from the start, erasing her slow, steady rise in confidence. But yeah, I genuinely really like both Kitching and Stringer and appreciate the different tones they brought to the comic. In the second half of the comic's lifespan, they wrote every single strip, with the only exception being this one strip titled The Trickster. Written by Jim Alexander, it represents a failed attempt to inject some new blood into the writing team. The strip is forgettable and riddled with continuity errors. Jim Alexander wouldn't return. Final note, unlike the current IDW writing staff, who I love by the way, Sonic the Comic's writers weren't really Sonic superfans, and I think that actually makes Sonic the Comic all the better. The writers have an obvious respect for the source material, but didn't get too bogged down, stuffing the strip with fan service moments or little niche references. They just did whatever they wanted, and that took the comic in loads of creative and unexpected directions and gave Sonic the Comic its distinct, odd character. The Sonic CD arc pretty much launches straight into another saga that's very faithful to the games, the Sonic 3 and Knuckles arc. Knuckles, the Guardian of the Floating Island, debuts in the 1994 Summer Special magazine. Robotnik crash lands on the floating island and convinces Knuckles that he, Robotnik, is a hero, and that Sonic is a baddie who's intent on stealing the floating island's treasured Chaos Emeralds. It's a premise that mirrors the games and sets up the storyline to come. The Sonic 3 and Knuckles adaptation officially starts off with issue 33, with a news broadcast reporting on Robotnik's suspected disappearance. Where is Robotnik? Well, Kinterball shares his belief, which turns out to be correct, that Robotnik has located and is hiding on the floating island, to the disbelief of the Freedom Fighters, who think the island is a mere legend. Sonic and Tails set off to try and find it, and what do you know? They do. Sonic and Tails land in Marble Garden Zone and find Robotnik hiding out there. That's when, bam, they get introduced to Knuckles, who appears to save the Doctor. Now, let's just time out here. Note, if you will, Knuckles' appearance. He has pink fur. He also has green shoe cuffs or socks. He wears a metal medallion on his chest. All of these little features are charming misinterpretations of Knuckles' in-game appearance in Sonic the Hedgehog 3. The pink fur would be corrected a few issues later and Knuckles would be red, but the shoes and medallion would stick around for the long haul until the end of the comic. The shoes and the pink fur are the result of some palette issues that Sonic 3 had. I cover them in more detail in this video if you want to know more. I happen to find this rustic Knuckles look rather charming though. Knuckles is still pink to me, damn it. Anyway, rather confusingly, as we discussed earlier, the Floating Island and Mobius have their own sets of emeralds. So Knuckles wants the Mobian set, and Robotnik has convinced him that Sonic wants the Floating Island set. Anyway, Sonic and Knuckles scrap for the first time, but Tails in the tornado manages to make off with a captured Robotnik, taking him back down to Mobius. Robotnik's new buddy Knuckles is able to track him down easily and tunnel him out of jail, complete with the Freedom Fighters' set of Chaos Emeralds, procured by Robotnik in exchange for Porker Lewis, who ended up being taken hostage. The thing is though, Knuckles and Robotnik's partnership doesn't last long at all. The duo make their way to the Temple of Chaos, the home of the floating island set of Chaos Emeralds, to unify both sets of emeralds together. It's at this point that Robotnik reveals his true motives and attempts to use the emeralds to power up. Knuckles isn't quite as naive as he's portrayed in the games. He never truly trusted Robotnik thoroughly and kept a little trick up his sleeve, the grey Chaos Emerald, which he uses to depower Robotnik and send him back to Mobius, drawing their alliance to an early close. This particular issue ends with a wonderful visual of Knuckles standing astride the Temple of Chaos, waiting for his lost people to return and rejecting Sonic's offer to join the Freedom Fighters. Don't worry though, the arc isn't over that quickly. In fact, this is where things get even more fun. Knuckles vows to remove all traces of Robotnik from the floating island. He wanders over to a new zone that's being constructed, the launch base zone, and he finds the huge, hulking Death Egg being built there. Before he can tackle that though, he makes a brief return to Mobius to help the Freedom Fighters give a vengeful Robotnik one more ass-kicking for good luck. When Knuckles once again returns to the floating island, he finds a colourful, large zone, the Carnival Night Zone, has been constructed, and it's ran by none other than my favourite trio, the Marxio brothers. Knuckles is initially very hesitant to let these intruders stay on his sacred island, even though the Marxio brothers deny any involvement with Robotnik. So the brothers try the hard sell on Knuckles, convincing him that any funds raised by the Carnival Night Zone can be used to support repairs to the floating island's more decayed zones. The first load of Carnival Night customers will be arriving tomorrow, so Knuckles better get used to visitors. The Marxios broker a deal. They convince Knuckles to ride the ghost train, and if he doesn't like it, they'll leave. The thing is, the treacherous Marxios rig the ride, so it actually tries to kill Knuckles. Ironically, Knuckles actually loves the White Knuckle experience, so he lets them stay. His love for the Marxio brothers doesn't last long though. The dumbest of the trio blurts out that they do work for Robotnik, causing a fight between them and Knuckles. Knuckles rids the floating island of the entire zone by smashing the ground, causing it to break away from the island and fall to Mobius. The whole purpose of the Marxios, though, was just to distract Knuckles while Robotnik finished building the Death Egg in secret.
Oh, mamma mia!
Then we get this really sinister strip. Robotnik launches the Death Egg and eviscerates Sonic with its laser. Sonic is dead. Oh no, wait. This was just a blue balls moment, imagining what the Death Egg could do. You nearly got me there, Fleetway.
Mr. President, allow me to demonstrate the awesome lethality of the Alan Parsons Project. Fire the laser!
Damage report! Damage report! It's okay. It's all right. Come on.
Well, actually, that was just footage from the movie Independence Day, but the real laser would be a lot like that. Yeah. Scary.
After catching wind of the Death Egg plan, Sonic and Knuckles head back to the floating island to try and stop its construction, but they end up landing in Sandopolis Zone and meet Knuckles again. That's when good old time sink Captain Plunder makes his return. He's caught wind of the floating island and landed there to hunt for treasure. It's a delay that Sonic and Knuckles can ill afford. Plunder and his crew unleash Sandopolis' hidden pyramids. Some elements from the games, like the Sandopolis Guardian, are adapted directly. He's defeated by sinking sand. Plunder and his pirates are scared off by the pyramid's ghosts, allowing Knuckles, the expert navigator of the island, to lead Sonic out of the pyramid and into the Lava Reef Zone safely. the ominous Death Egg looks down from the rim of Lava Reef Zone, primed to launch once its power source, the Master Emerald, has been stolen and installed. Yes, this is where the Master Emerald is finally introduced, and it's in the hands of a new METALLIX robot, better known as Mecha Sonic. METALLIX receives a significant power boost from the Master Emerald and takes aim at Sonic. It takes Sonic transforming into Super Sonic to dispose of METALLIX. Unfortunately, the battle between Super and METALLIX afforded Robotnik the opportunity to sneakily steal the Master Emerald and launch the Death Egg, causing the floating island to go into freefall. How do Sonic and Knuckles bring down this metal monstrosity? They attack on two fronts. Knuckles figures out he can pilot the floating island like a giant warship, and opens fire on the Death Egg, helping Sonic, who's snuck inside, to dislodge the Master Emerald. Knuckles gives the Death Egg one more blast to blow it to smithereens. That's one aspect to the floating island that I didn't know about. With Robotnik defeated, the Arc ends in a rather touching way. Sonic makes a suggestion. Before reinstating the Master Emerald, he suggests that Knuckles lets the floating island land in one of Mobius' seas, and pleads for the island to serve as a refuge for the Emerald Hill folk that Robotnik despises so much. The formerly isolationist Knuckles agrees, allowing refugees to inhabit the Mushroom Hill Zone, providing them a safe sanctuary away from Robotnik. As the Master Emerald is reinstated, the island returns to its home in the clouds. With Knuckles officially introduced, this is the perfect time to talk about him in more depth, which is an exciting proposition because the run of Knuckles strips, written by Nigel Kitching and illustrated by Nigel Dobbin, might well be my favourite run of strips in Sonic the Comic history. One particularly refreshing thing about Fleetway Knuckles is that he isn't depicted as a naive buffoon. Yes, Knuckles was tricked by Robotnik, but he gets the better of him in the end, and being fooled or being a dunderhead isn't a major character trait. He is fooled by one other villain, but I'm sure you'll agree in a second, it's a perfectly understandable situation. What kind of character is Fleetway Knuckles then? Despite starting off as something of a hothead, most of the solo Knuckles strips are actually more slow-paced and dialogue-heavy than the Sonic strips. Knuckles does use his strength to beat up a lot of foes, but he often finds himself playing the role of a calm and empathetic mediator who's able to talk things out to come to a peaceful resolution rather than always relying on brawling. When I think Fleetway Knuckles, I think of his friendly rivalry with Sonic. He's an ally, but never a fully fledged freedom fighter. I also see him as a tragic figure, living alone on his home, unable to pass the ruined civilization around him, always waiting for the return of his people that never comes. Issue 65 marks the start of a long, wonderful Knuckles storyline. In this issue, he meets another echidna for the first time, the white-furred Dr. Zachary, who suddenly appears, claiming to be chased down by a robot. This is a big deal, and Knuckles offers assistance and shelter to the elderly echidna, but unfortunately gets no answers about the fate of his race from Zachary. The robot was under the control of Zachary all along, and actually, it's an ancient echidna technology. It storms into the Chaos Emerald chamber, rips the Master Emerald to pieces, and absorbs the Master Emerald's power for itself, causing the floating island to crash down on a mountaintop. Knuckles does regain control of the situation, decapitating the robot and watching Zachary seemingly fall to his doom, but Zachary's past is never revealed. He's one of the comic's most mysterious characters. Interestingly, the first Zachary strip depicts the echidna civilization as Mesoamerican coded, and also shows the echidnas to have constructed sophisticated Guardian robots, ideas that would actually crop up in Sonic games down the line. Whatever the case, the Zachary story set in motion a long quest for Knuckles. With the Master Emerald destroyed and the floating island now being held up by a robot head, Knuckles goes to replace it with an emerald mine from an old, ancient quarry. There he meets the ghostly visage of an extinct race of dinosaurs, driven to extinction by the echidnas, evidence that perhaps they weren't as peaceful as Knuckles hopes they might have been. The strip is beautifully brought to life by Dobbin's art, and after some bone-smashing fun, Knuckles is able to broker peace with the spirit of the herd as they bond over their shared fate of being the last of their respective races. With a new Master Emerald now in place, Knuckles engages in a long quest for more information about his island home. First, he teams up with Captain Plunder, who crash lands on the floating island, claiming to have a treasure chest full of Echidna scrolls. Knuckles makes a deal to help Plunder on one of his greedy quests in return for the scrolls. The little quest this time involves plundering a ghostly pirate ship manned by godlike beings, so it's a pretty big ask by Plunder. After some ghostly hijinks, Knuckles is given the chest of scrolls, but now in a pirate bay on Mobius, he's left to make his own way back to the floating island. He begins a treacherous journey home, which takes him on a series of mini-adventures along the way. For example, Knuckles ends up passing by a weird, isolated village with a spooky ambience. Does this place ring any bells? Can anyone guess what's going on here? Of course, I never clocked on as a kid, but this story is pretty much just a tamer retelling of the horror movie The Wicker Man. Seriously, some scenes have been completely lifted from the film, although there's no nudity here. The villagers threaten to burn Knuckles in a wooden, egg-shaped Wicker Man-style effigy, but he manages to escape. Next, Knuckles finds himself passing through a Wild West-style zone and nearly gets lynched after a misunderstanding with some banditos. Apparently the writers did want to have Knuckles properly noosed here, but was censored by the editors, so we had to settle for this underarm job. Like I said, the Knuckles strips got a little weird, and I love them. When Knuckles finally gets back home, riding a pterodactyl procured from the aforementioned Wild West zone, he finds the floating island invaded by Robotnik and Dr. Zachary, which leads into a later story, so let's stop for now. Rather tragically, the Knuckles stories would die out after issue 100, and Knuckles would be reduced to a part-time character, with Tails and Amy receiving more attention and being given more solo strips at the expense of Knuckles. It's a shame because, like I said, Dobbin and Kitching's work was some of the best in the comics history, combining some of Kitching's more zany and esoteric ideas with Dobbin's absolutely fantastic ambient artwork brought to life by his beautiful use of watercolors. Just amazing stuff. Sonic the Comic at its best. This feels like a good time to talk a little bit more about the Chaotix crew. Unlike Tails, Amy, and others, the comic never gives us the full lowdown on the Chaotix crew, never elaborating on how they formed, how embedded Knack was in the group, or what exactly the Omniviewer actually is. They were always very much secondary characters, but that's okay. There isn't always room in the spotlight for everyone. I get the feeling that the Chaotix crew were, at times, kind of portrayed as a throwback team, reminiscent of Marvel Comics' Golden Age. In one strip, their base is revealed to be this retro-looking intergalactic hub. In later strips, their base is a big, branded building out in New Tech City, a prominent city in the Special Zone. The most developed character in the Chaotix is actually Charmy. He's characterized as an overly optimistic little fella who gets on everyone's nerves, partially because he speaks with a unique little verbal tick. I've seen fans suggest that the way he talks is inspired by Ned Flanders, but this was debunked a long time ago when Nigel Kitching revealed that he is, in fact, inspired by an obscure character from 2000 AD. I'm not sure exactly who, though. Charmy is actually a prince, with his mother being the queen of a hive of worker bees. In one strip, Charmy returns home with Sonic and saves the hive from an invasion of Mongol-inspired hornets. In another, Charmy saves the Chaotix from their enemies, the Fundamental Four, with the help of some worker bees. You've got to respect Charmy giving up the royal high life to be verbally abused by the rest of his team just because he wants to be something of a superhero. One curious side note is that Charmy is also a prince in the Archie comics too, which is a weird and wonderful coincidence. The rest of the Chaotix crew are fairly underdeveloped. The de facto leader is Vector the Crocodile. It's never explicitly mentioned, but I get the impression that he's meant to be the brains of the crew and the level-headed one. In one issue, to restore the broken Omniviewer to its former glory, he travels to a top-secret scientific facility staffed entirely by crocodiles. None of these crocs are explained to be relatives, but it really makes me wonder if Vector's entire family are all scientists or something. It's worth noting that when the Chaotix need to use a gadget or gizmo, it's always Vector doing the operating, so he's definitely the smarty pants of the group. Mighty is the brawn of the Chaotix. He's immensely strong and short-tempered. Again though, there's not much to say about Mighty beyond that, but one interesting note is that his dad appears in the comic. Mighty's dad is a mustachioed armadillo called Blockhead Bill, who speaks with a Yosemite Sam accent. He also appears as an antagonist at one point in the comic. Like his son, Bill has a short temper, but seems to be a little senile in his old age. Bill is close buddies with an upper-class, well-dressed lizard called Society Max, his best friend and business partner, and his former crime-fighting partner too. In one story, the two former crime fighters' minds are controlled by a mysterious creature called Root. When Max eats a particular type of root, he transforms into a fierce T-Rex, quite different from his usual style. It seems like Mighty followed in his father's footsteps by taking up the superhero mantle. He's a second-generation hero. I imagine he just wants to make his father proud. The final Chaotix member is Espio. As a chameleon, Espio quite regularly uses his camouflaging ability to effectively turn invisible, making him quite effective at stealthy missions. Decent ability. Foes can't see him. I guess he's the John Cena of the Chaotix, huh?
Are you sure about that?
Unfortunately though, that's about all there is to say about Espio. Aside from being a bit of a snippy and sarcastic character, he's the least fleshed out member of the crew. I guess, finally, there's also Knack the Weasel. Like I said, there's no backstory, so we don't know how or why Knack ended up joining the Chaotix. But after his initial betrayal, he remains a permanent enemy of the Chaotix, of Sonic, of Knuckles, of just about everyone, come to think of it. The Fleetway writers decided to have Knack have the unique ability of utilizing shrinking and growing technology. I'm not sure how the writers landed on this little quirky ability, but it's interesting. It makes Knack quite a formidable foe, and it actually elevates Knack to quite an important villain, as a later story arc really hinges on Knack's shrinking technology. Let's go deep here. Enough about characters, let's talk lore, real esoteric stuff. One of the absolute craziest topics to discuss is the Chaos Emeralds. The first time the Chaos Emeralds appear, it's in the form of a throwaway and inconsequential cameo, as Sonic travels through the Special Zone as a kind of warp pipe. In this first appearance, there's 6 Chaos Emeralds. 5 of them are red and 1 green. Most likely an oversight by the writer or artist, who might not have been necessarily that familiar with the significance of the Emeralds. By the time the Sonic CD arc rolled around, the Emeralds were playing a central role in the comics, though so many of the specific details about them varied wildly from story to story. For example, it's stated by Dr. Kinterbor in Sonic's Origin that there are 7 Chaos Emeralds, but most of the time at this stage in the comic, we only tend to see 6 emeralds collected together. Even Kinterbor himself only collected 6, with that 7th being elusive and missing. Now when the emeralds are gathered together, I guess when at least 6 of them are gathered together bad things tend to happen. The emeralds have a tendency to explode, emitting immense amounts of chaos energy, and then they disappear, scattering into the special zone. The combustible emeralds can be contained by power rings, or by keeping the emeralds at a low temperature in sub-zero zones, or, in the case of the Freedom Fighters, in a special little portable freezing device. Without these safeguards, the Chaos Emerald explosions have devastating consequences. There's at least one continuity error to address already though here. The comic tells us that the emeralds were all, at one point in time, green, but the Kintabor explosion gave them different hues. It's an explanation that's later retconned when we learn the emerald's true origin. I guess it's possible that sometimes the emeralds lose their hues and tints and turn green on occasion. Who knows? The emeralds, though, aren't inherently evil. In fact, they have the ability to absorb evil, as is evidenced when the emeralds reduce Captain Plunder and his crew into a group of hippies. Things get more confusing, though, with the introduction of Knuckles. It's revealed that Knuckles guards a set of intact Chaos Emeralds that keep the floating island floating in the sky. As it turns out, there are 2 sets of emeralds, a Mobius set and a floating island set. More accurately, these 2 sets were once one complete set that was split long ago into 12 Chaos Emeralds. During the Sonic 3 and Knuckles arc, the emeralds are unified into a set of 6 once again. So the numbers are getting confusing here. Are there 6, 12, or 7 Chaos Emeralds? What happened to that mysterious 7th Chaos Emerald? That would be the Grey Chaos Emerald, which Knuckles protects, and it acts as a kind of controller emerald over the others, capable of overpowering them. The second half of the Sonic 3 and Knuckles storyline introduces the concept of the Master Emerald, without which, Knuckles explains, the floating island would surely sink. It's another little retcon, elevating the Master Emerald over the other Chaos Emeralds who formerly held the honour of keeping the island floating. From this point onwards though, the comic has a level of consistency. Until the comic's dying day, there remain 6 normal Chaos Emeralds and 1 Master Emerald. But despite the obvious importance of the Master Emerald, the Grey Emerald still acts as the Controller Emerald, and it can even overpower the Master Emerald. So the question of how many there are is a little bit complex, but where they came from, now that's something we know. A long time ago, the ancient Echidna civilization venerated giant emeralds that were mined from an ancient quarry. These giant emeralds were, as far as we're told, fairly normal and possessing no real mystical quality. But they were stolen by an ancient alien race who imbued them with chaos energy, giving them their unusual colours. The Echidnas successfully stole the emeralds back, which triggered an ancient war that we'll discuss later again. The interesting thing is that the chaos energy inside the emeralds can be transferred to other objects. The emeralds themselves are mere conduits for the chaos energy inside. For example, the original Master Emerald is actually destroyed at one point, and its power is absorbed into the head of the robot that destroyed it. When Knuckles saves the day, the robot's decapitated head then acts as a substitute Master Emerald, until Knuckles is able to mine a new one, meaning the Master Emerald is entirely replaced at one point. It's wild, but that, ladies and gentlemen, is the complete lore of the Fleetway Chaos Emeralds. We move on now to the comic's 3rd major arc. Technically, the Brotherhood of the METALLIX storyline started life as a thinly veiled Knuckles Chaotix adaptation, but it always felt quite far removed from that game. I've actually covered the Brotherhood of the METALLIX in a lot more detail in their own video, so I'll give a brief overview of what the arc is all about here. After the Sonic 3 and Knuckles story, Knuckles doesn't get any rest. He's almost immediately transported to the Special Zone and confronted by the zone's guardians, Team Chaotix, which also includes Knack the Weasel and the Omniviewer, which allows the Chaotix to travel just about anywhere with ease. Knuckles and the Chaotix clash at first, but quickly become allies. They have a bit of a bonding experience when two METALLIX robots appear in the Omniviewer and steal its power. It turns out that the METALLIX robot, Sonic Beat, wasn't the only one of them. There's more, and they're multiplying and hiding out in the Special Zone. Their leader is the gigantic Emperor METALLIX, and they operate out of an old fortress of Dr. Robotnik's. The Chaotix go to said fortress to retrieve the Omniviewer. They skulk around the base and are found by another METALLIX who has a fight with them. The Chaotix beat him, but it takes the whole team just to bring down this one METALLIX. Anyway, it's Knack who leads the team to the chamber of the Emperor, before selling them out. Yes, Knack turns heel. The Emperor doesn't much appreciate Knack. He's now served his purpose after delivering the Chaotix to him, so he asks for his Goonies to take care of Knack and kill him off. Knack brought a gun to defend himself that Knuckles takes and uses to go Rambo, seemingly destroying the entire Brotherhood. This is only really the beginning though, as the story temporarily ends here with the Emperor's backup system booting up. Ultimately, the METALLIX were able to successfully copy the Omniviewer. So time, and now let's go back to Mobius. When Robotnik learns that the METALLIX have gone rogue and catches wind that they were multiplying independently in the Special Zone, he decides that he needs to do the unthinkable and work alongside Sonic to defeat a greater menace, especially after the Brotherhood kidnap Grimer and have him design them the Alpha device, a doohickey designed to roboticize the Miracle Planet. Teaming with Sonic is particularly painful now, because one of Robotnik's goofier creations, a robot based on nightmare-fueled British TV star Mr. Blobby, has successfully subdued Sonic. But alas, right now, Robotnik has a bigger fish to fry. So, guided by Robotnik, the Freedom Fighters head to the Miracle Planet to try to stop the mecha-forming process. Porker Lewis is instrumental in seemingly defeating the Brotherhood. He turns one defeated METALLIX robot into a walking bomb who blows up most of the Brotherhood. But before he can disable the Alpha device, the Miracle Planet disappears, with Porker and a half-destroyed Emperor METALLIX on it. After a month, the planet reappears, but it's been totally cyberformed. To be honest, it does look kinda cool. Porker appears, and he's seemingly okay until it's revealed that he's been kidnapped and replaced with Mecha Porker, who tries to kill Sonic and the Chaotix, who are here to help now too. Unfortunately, Sonic and the Chaotix really are here too late. The Brotherhood reveal that they've used their evil Omniviewer to change history, to mecha form not just the Miracle Planet, but the entirety of planet Mobius. Sonic and the Chaotix are ruthlessly hunted down by a squad of METALLIX robots, but then they're saved by a mysterious hooded figure. Can you guess who this might be?
Who's that Pokemon?
It's Dr. Kinterbor. What part of history could the METALLIX possibly have changed to make the present suit their image? Well, it turns out that they stopped Dr. Robotnik being created. Hence, Kinterbor exists in this alternate timeline. We get some high IQ time travel hijinks here, as Sonic has to tragically ensure Kinterbor has his eggy accident to restore the future, or the present, I guess, to its correct state. It's a shame, but Kinterbor had to turn into Robotnik. With Sonic successfully ensuring that Kinterbor does morph into Robotnik, Sonic and the Chaotix return to the present, and all is how it should be. Now it's time to finish off the Brotherhood once and for all. Sonic discovers that good old Robotnik actually has a self-destruct device which should be able to disable every single METALLIX. Of course, he kept this a secret. His hope was that the METALLIX would destroy Sonic and the Freedom Fighters. When he sent Sonic on this mission, the absolute snake. Still, Sonic is able to grab the device and finally deal the death blow to the entire Brotherhood. The story is bookended nicely in issue 79, when the gang return to the Miracle Planet and find it deserted, save for one Mobian who's taking up residence there. The METALLIX truly are defeated, and the Miracle Planet remains roboticized but completely empty, and it's never seen again in the comic. Of all of the comic's original characters, one who seems to have enjoyed massive crossover appeal is Tekno. Tekno is a green canary and is originally introduced as a prisoner of Dr. Robotnik's. It's revealed that she's a former engineer of the Doctor's, though how hardcore a Robotnik supporter she was is hard to say. I get the impression that she had the technical expertise and reluctantly worked under Robotnik. She's freed from imprisonment by an armoured superhero called Shortfuse, for the express purpose of helping him to upgrade his cybernetic exoskeleton armour. Tekno helps to give Shortfuse some nifty upgrades and later is introduced to the Freedom Fighters. After that introduction, Tekno becomes a stalwart member of the team, offering up her own secret high-tech base under the Emerald Hill Zone for the Freedom Fighters to make use of. With a traumatised Porker Lewis effectively out of action at this point in time, Tekno steps up to replace him as the Freedom Fighters' new technical whiz kid, offering up a number of nifty inventions for the team to use. Of particular note, she spends a lot of time adventuring with Amy Rose later in the comic, and their friendship is quite endearing. It's free from all of the squabbling and friendly rivalries that mark most of the comic's other relationships. In all honesty, Tekno is kind of carried by her strong visual design. I don't want to be too spicy in my take, but there's not much to say about Tekno's personality. In her debut strip, she's written with a certain amount of snark and sass, but this side of her character is dropped quickly, and she becomes a bit of a blank slate. There's no doubting she has a very strong look though, with that fringe, the striped jumper, and the large earrings, which, by the way, in James Bond fashion, double as both a nifty fashion accessory and an offensive weapon. Kaboom! I think it's perhaps due to her look, and I guess her relationship with Amy, that she's remained popular among the fanbase to the extent where she's probably the second most well-known Fleetway character, behind Super Sonic, at a rough estimate. Then we have the guy who freed Tekno, Shortfuse the Cybernetic. Shortfuse is another popular original Fleetway character created by Lou Stringer. He's the furry equivalent of Iron Man or War Machine. Shortfuse starts life as a disgruntled squirrel called Shorty. He has anger issues and, like many animals, has a vendetta against Dr. Robotnik. He's actually brave enough, but perhaps foolish enough, to launch a solo attack against Dr. Robotnik. The attack fails. He's captured and horrifically stuffed as a test experiment into cybernetic armour, which is a kind of advanced version of a badnik made of fictional metal megatau, Fleetway's equivalent to adamantium or vibranium. Unlike most other badniks, Shorty retains his consciousness when he's in the cybernetic armour and becomes a sworn enemy of Dr. Robotnik. The sad thing is though, Shorty is sealed in the armour, with seemingly no hope of ever getting out. That's how tough the armour is. Trapped inside, Shortfuse vows to remain a pain in Robotnik's side as long as he has the ability to fight him. Shortfuse is similar to Knuckles in that he never becomes a full-on member of the Freedom Fighters, much preferring to work solo, which is a shame because of his immense power. But because of his anger issues, he doesn't work well as part of a team, often rushing into battle hastily or clashing with authority figures, putting the Freedom Fighters in danger whenever he fights alongside them. On more than one occasion, when Amy was acting as the Freedom Fighters' de facto leader in Sonic's absence, Shortfuse got on her nerves and stormed off, after endangering the Freedom Fighters' lives. In one of the more uplifting Sonic the Comic stories, an alien race with advanced technological capabilities helped Shortfuse out of his armor for the first time, allowing Shorty to jump in and out of the battle armor, which is obviously an immensely handy change. Shorty's newfound freedom is cut, excuse the pun, short, because very shortly afterwards he's trapped back in it again, sacrificing his ability to eject from his armor by injecting that particular bit of software to permanently remove his arch nemesis Vermin, another Cybernik, from his armor. It's only in the last few comics that Shortfuse is finally freed from his armor forever, but we'll come to that later. Thanks to his strong design, incredible powers, and prominent personality, I was always a giant fan of Shortfuse, and I dare say he's remained an underrated element of Fleetway's legacy, not getting his due as much as other lesser Fleetway characters and creations. Maybe his time in the sun will come soon, and he'll join the likes of Tekno and Super Sonic as someone who's known outside of the Fleetway bubble by the wider Sonic fanbase. I alluded to this in my Is Fleetway Sonic a Jerk video, but it bears repeating. As a British comic, Sonic the Comic is dripping with British culture, which makes it a cosy read for me and surely a treat for non-Brits. Fleetway's Mobius is like a little parallel version of Britain, with all of our main yearly celebrations covered. It's a little weird, but it's also kind of quaint to see seasonal festivities like Halloween, Bonfire Night, Christmas and New Year's celebrated just as routinely on Mobius as they are here in good old Blighty. Of course, most of these celebrations aren't exclusive to Britain, but they mark exciting times in any school kid's calendar, and some of them play a surprisingly prominent role in the comic. For example, it's surprising just how many strips feature New Year's as a plot point. It's celebrated on Mobius like it is here, with Mobians eagerly anticipating the clock striking midnight and indulging in a little partying. Things get a little deeper and more metaphysical in a strip where Amy and Tekno are transported to a primordial planet where every New Year's Eve, the spirit of the upcoming year is required to enter the time stream, or the universe might well end. In this particular strip, a monster scares the spirit of 1999 off, which nearly allows the spirit of 1930 to swoop in and turn back time to the good old days. Fortunately though, in the end, 1999 proceeds as required. Most New Year's stories are a little lighter than that one though. Like this story where Sonic and Tails travel to the floating island just to wish Grumpy Knuckles a Happy New Year. In Scotland, New Year's is called Hogmanay, which gives rise to a couple of obvious puns in the comic. Good one, Knuckles. Every October, things got a little creepy as Halloween-based strips dominated the comic. Mobius, as it turns out, is a hotbed for supernatural activity on Halloween night. Of particular note is this strip from issue 141. Sonic goes to the Haunted Zone on the night of Halloween and ends up being possessed by little demon fellas, only for Tails to save the day. It's one of the comic's weirder strips for sure, and it's quite sinister. Sonic nearly goes fully evil here. There's always spooky shenanigans going on Halloween. Finally, an exclusive British celebration, Bonfire Night, perhaps better known as Guy Fawkes Night to Americans, maybe? Brits' Bonfire Night activities in celebration of Guy Fawkes' failed attack on the Houses of Parliament usually include setting off fireworks and sometimes burning Guy Fawkes effigies. Over on Mobius, the night seems to be celebrated by burning Dr. Robotnik effigies instead, and there's plenty of fireworks too. Then we come to good old Christmas. Christmas is celebrated on Mobius with a big meal, party hats, gift giving, Christmas trees and all that good stuff. Here's a secret though, Father Christmas is real, at least in Sonic the Comic. Santa first appears in issue 93 in a strip that kind of reminds me of A Christmas Carol a little bit. On Christmas Day, an angry, bitter Robotnik sees Mobians enjoying themselves and intends to launch an assault on them to ruin their day. He's interrupted by good old Kris Kringle. Father Christmas tries to convince Robotnik to mend his ways and stop being such a grouch, but his message falls on deaf ears. Or did it? The strip ends with Robotnik at his most vulnerable, alone on Christmas Day with no friends, looking a bit upset. It's the sole moment where Robotnik elicits some sympathy in the comic. Santa appears a few more times. One year, Santa recruits the help of Captain Christmas, a nefarious stealer of Christmas presents, to punish him for his naughty deeds. And in issue 119, he reprimands Vile Peter, an elf gone bad, who reminds me of some of Europe's weirder Christmas characters like Krampus. In this strip, Sonic mistakes Santa for Dr. Robotnik and tries to give him a bit of a beatdown. By the way, Santa really does the rounds on Christmas Day. He even delivers presents to kids in the special zone. Ah, and how can I forget? A festival that trumps all the others that's celebrated every 4 years here in the UK, the World Cup. Of course, being a British comic, there had to be at least a couple of football strips, didn't there? Or perhaps you prefer soccer. In this Sonic strip, Sonic is captured by football manager Ronnie Dribble, who tries to imbue Sonic's speed into his own lazy players, Space Jam style. He gets arrested at the end of the strip though. Wow, football on Mobius is almost as corrupt as it is here in the real world. We've covered a lot of ground, but I've been saving up one massive topic. It's time to get a little spicy. We've talked writers, now let's talk artists. A massive array of artists worked on the comic, dwarfing the relatively small cachet of writers. I'm not going to do a comprehensive run-through of every artist because there's too many to talk about, but I wanted to discuss a handful of the most significant ones here. The good, the bad, and the ugly, if you will. The most well-known and popular artist in Sonic the Comic history remains Richard Elson. When people think Sonic the Comic, images of his version of Sonic spring to mind, walking around with his furrowed brow and semi-permanent scowl. Elson had spent a number of years contributing to Sci-Fi Comic 2000 AD before his Sonic the Comic stint, and I think he ported over a lot of 2000 AD's dystopian sci-fi stylings to Mobius, bringing a lot of personality to the comic. Elson really was fantastic. His backgrounds were popping with detail, his action sequences always impactful, and most fundamentally, his character designs always had a slightly thorny edge to them. Elson seemed to favour giving a lot of his characters fierce tusks, as with Captain Plunder. Elson just had a real knack for character design. So many panels are just dripping with cool-looking characters that you never see again. It's testament to Elson's wonderful style. What Elson brought to the comic then was a kind of angsty grittiness and bombastic personality that helped to make the comic a feast for the eyes. The few double-page spreads that Elson did really showcased just how good he was. Final note on Elson. You can see his style evolve as the comic goes on. I think Elson's work peaked during the comic's midpoint, between the Sonic CD and Sonic 3D arcs. I think his adventure-era Sonic crew look a little less charming. Right behind Elson in terms of importance is Nigel Dobbin, best known for his extended run illustrating the Knuckles strips. Dobbin's art had a really powerful, ethereal quality to it. The writing of the Knuckles strips was often a bit more esoteric than the Sonic strips, and Dobbin's artwork complemented the quieter, more mysterious vibe perfectly. In particular, Dobbin had a wonderful talent for drawing highly expressive characters and beautifully evocative landscapes and backgrounds. Dobbin's excellent line art really came to life thanks to his use of paints. Dobbin's secret weapon was his use of colour. Dobbin's strips were hand-painted, and that resulted in his art being luscious and, frankly, beautiful. Dobbin coloured
more than just his own strips, and every strip that Dobbin coloured looked great. To be completely honest, his later digitally coloured artwork is nowhere near as good. The colour really tied everything together. Alongside those two, Robert Corona also deserves a shout out as the comic's bronze medalist in the art category. A regular contributor with a fairly distinct style, I always enjoyed Corona's work, and I feel he's quite underrated. He cut his teeth working on the Amy strips and deserves credit for always giving Amy plenty of creative and memorable outfits. Corona's work is less showy than Elson's or Dobbin's, but he got so many character designs absolutely spot on. My favourite Corona stuff is his Blade Runner-esque Zone Runner Tales stories. They are the big three, but there's plenty of artists that fall into the just okay category. Not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but more understated and less epic. Carl Flint springs to mind here. Flint's art was more definitively bright, cheerful and cartoony than the aforementioned artists. Flint's jovial style highlights the power of art and colours in creating atmosphere. Flint's chirpy version of Mobius is inhabited by friendly-looking animals, and it feels a million miles away from the more gritty Richard Elson Mobius. Like Flint, Andy Pritchett's art also had a comfortable, non-threatening vibe about it, with a gorgeously luscious and colourful style that wouldn't look out of place in a children's storybook. While I find Flint's art a little flat, I always liked how full-bodied Pritchett's characters looked. Pritchett seemed to enjoy throwing just about every animal imaginable into the background of his stories, which added to that storybook feel that he brought to his work. My main gripe with Pritchett is that he had an annoying tendency of continually tracing that weird-looking Sonic 3D render in his strips.
Stop it. Get some help.
Then there's Jose Casanovas. Casanovas is a really interesting one. He worked on a number of early strips, including a few Nameless Zone ones. His unique style is hyper-detailed. Great for depicting horrible monsters or goblins, but maybe not suited to Sonic the Hedgehog. His version of Sonic and Tails look a little too waxed and sheened. One name that has to be brought up is Mick McMahon. After Elson and Dobbin, McMahon was, I think, the third most prolific artist to work on the comics, and in the comics' later days he worked on an awful lot of the covers. McMahon had quite an abstract, blocky style. Now, I've seen McMahon's style work in stuff like Judge Dredd and Hellboy, but to be completely honest, I never cared for McMahon's work in Sonic the comic. McMahon's work always felt a little emotionless, with Sonic lacking the dynamism that other artists brought to the character. The washed-out colours that McMahon often opted for didn't help either. Perhaps my main issue with McMahon's style was his proclivity for drawing most Mobians as these weird, pink rat-like creatures, which I always found a little reductive, repetitive and unappealing. Compared to Elson or hell, even Flint, McMahon's vision of Mobius felt completely drab. Incidentally, in retrospect, I think McMahon's style works quite nicely in the comic's non-Sonic strips, like in Decap Attack. But yeah, I think the fact that McMahon contributed quite so many Sonic strips overexposed him a little, and really put me off his style as a kid.
Intruders.
Let's see how fast you can really go!
Without doubt, the most popular Fleetway character is Super Sonic. So the next story arc, centered on Super and culminating in issue 100, should be of particular interest. I'll go out on a limb and say that this was my personal favourite Fleetway story. Each fortnight, I felt myself getting more and more pumped up until my excitement reached a fever pitch after finishing issue 99 and eagerly anticipating the milestone issue 100 back in the day. Keep in mind that this is the first major story arc that doesn't have its basis in one of the Sonic games, so it's Fleetway's first attempt at an entirely original saga. The story starts with issue 80. Sonic pays a visit to the floating island and finds that Knuckles is away. Sonic is here to ask Porker, who's now living with Knuckles on the island, to rejoin the Freedom Fighters. Sonic accidentally falls into the Emerald Chamber, and after being immersed in powerful chaos energy, transforms into a beastly incarnation of Super Sonic. Richard Elson really turned up the dial on the scariness here. Super, consumed by hatred, decides to make it his mission to hunt down Amy Rose. Super makes a beeline for Amy, wreaking absolute havoc in the process. Crucially, in the chaos, no Freedom Fighter was hurt, but when Sonic comes back to his senses and he surveys the destruction around him, he's consumed with guilt, no doubt thinking he's killed Amy. Sonic goes on the run and hides out in a sludgy bar in Metropolis Zone. Unfortunately, the bar's unwashed patrons antagonize Sonic, making him angry and unleashing Super again. Amy and Freedom Fighters manage to track him down by his immense energy signal and enact an ingenious plan. They effectively rope Super to a Special Zone lamppost. Super throws an immense tantrum, resulting in Super and Sonic splitting into two distinct entities, with Super being sucked into the Special Zone. This idea of splitting Super and Sonic into two distinct characters was actually Richard Burton's, editor at the time, and it was inspired by Marvel Comics. Super Sonic was inspired by the Hulk, and this split between Super and Sonic was inspired by a Bruce Banner Hulk split that took place in Marvel Comics. Of course, Sonic can't just leave Super on the loose, so he travels to the Special Zone 2 to warn the Chaotix. The confident Chaotix don't seem overly concerned. In fact, they have some supervillains to attend to first in New Tech City. In the Chaotix versus assorted supervillains battle, Sonic ends up getting arrested by New Tech City police. Sonic is bailed out of jail by the mysterious Lord Sidewinder. Sidewinder is the smoking jacket-wearing head of a gang of scoundrels, which also includes Biohazard, a giant polluting robot, Lightmare, who reminds me of Moon Knight, and Fleetway's answer to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Mr. Fry. Sidewinder, it turns out, is actually harbouring Super Sonic and bailed Sonic out of jail to offer to Super in hopes that he'll then join the gang. Sidewinder's plan doesn't quite go as expected. Super's ready to renege on that agreement immediately and starts an almighty brawl as Sonic, Super, Sidewinder's crew, and later the Chaotix all fight each other in a gigantic Royal Rumble. The brawl ends with Sonic smashing Super into the Omniviewer, who traps him in a state of suspended animation. That was surprisingly easy. Super is defeated, or is he? Unfortunately not. Charmy sees Super move ever so slightly, but not wanting to get shouted at, he tells no one. Super is temporarily subdued in the Omniviewer, and Sonic is trapped in a Special Zone with no way of getting home. But it isn't long until the rest of the gang see Super's subtle movements and have to come up with a new plan to deal with him. They decide to take Super to the Black Asteroid, a former mining facility, and trap him inside with a gravitation bomb. The Chaotix and Sonic pull off the first stage of their plan, taking the Omniviewer and Super to the depths of the Black Asteroid. After that, we get a number of issues where calm subsides for a while. Fast forward to issue 97, and it's time to kick off the Doomsday story in the run-up to issue 100. A second sun appears in the sky over planet Meridian in the Special Zone, a bad omen according to Mighty, as the Omniviewer, who's supposed to be housing Super, reappears to warn the Chaotix of terrible danger. Omni explains that Super was too powerful to be contained, and he's now emitting an astronomical amount of energy, heating up the Black Asteroid and transforming it into an electron bomb. Vector heads off to a laboratory to get the Omniviewer fixed up, and the scientists there warn him that should Super cause an explosion, it's likely to disable any and all electronics. Now, in the comic's other strips, things aren't exactly going peachy either. Robotnik has finally discovered the secret hiding place of the hated Emerald Hill folk, and he's invaded the floating island with the help of Dr. Zachary. He strapped Knuckles and the Emerald Hill folk to a giant machine to use them as an organic battery. Elsewhere on Mobius, in Robotnik's absence, Grimer has unleashed a horde of badniks on protesters in Metropolis Zone that Amy is trying her best to take care of. Sonic is informed of Robotnik's actions, and, as if enough wasn't already going on, he's informed of some more bad news by Lightmare, who, as it turns out, is Lord Sidewinder's daughter. Sidewinder is still intent on utilising Super Sonic for his own evil machinations. So, we're in issue 99. The Chaotix and Sonic head off to fight Sidewinder one more time. Sonic devises a quick solution to all of his problems and tells Omni to transport the Black Asteroid and Super to Mobius. Each strip in issue 99 ends with the Black Asteroid hanging ominously over the skies of Mobius. It's really brilliant how all the comics' stories found themselves weaved together in issue 99, and in issue 100 we get the big resolution in the form of one long, unbroken story. So it's time to talk about the milestone issue 100.
A few moments later.
So, how does this epic yarn conclude? The Black Asteroid explodes over Mobius, and as a result disables all of Robotnik's machines, rendering his mechanized empire null, which saves both Knuckles and the Metropolis Zone protesters. The only issue? Super Sonic is free again, and he wants to serve up some destruction. The thing is though, the immense explosion took a lot out of Super, and his energy starts depleting. All of a sudden, he's forced to retreat. The story ends on a positive note, but with something of a cliffhanger. Sonic is able to finally return to Mobius via the Omniviewer. Robotnik's empire is suddenly toppled. Knuckles and the Emerald Hill folk are free, and Super Sonic doesn't appear to be a threat anymore. In an act of humiliation, Robotnik is paraded through the streets defeated, but he's rescued by Grimer in a non-electrical, steam-powered contraption. After all of that, will we see Super Sonic and Robotnik again in the comics?
All I know is my gut says maybe.
The build-up to issue 100 was a really intense thrill ride, and pulling off a big, interlinked, multi-story comic was an ambitious way to celebrate the milestone. It really worked. Kitching has said that he wanted Robotnik to lose properly, because although Sonic always got the upper hand over Robotnik, Robotnik had continued to rule over Mobius for nearly 100 issues. Kitching wanted Sonic to finally properly beat and defeat Robotnik, to show that his efforts weren't in vain. That's all well and good, but what of Super Sonic? After issue 100, Super spends most of the rest of the comic suffering from amnesia or desperately repressing his dark side, with his powers severely reduced or kept in check. Starting with issue 100, for a short time, he's housed by an elderly couple. He's suffering from nightmares of his horrific past, seemingly now quite meek, mild, and innocent after the incident. Quite a change of personality. He's actually really endearing when he's not being all terrifying. He's so cute. The gentle, cartoony, artistic direction of Nigel Kitching also helps here, softening the fierce, fanged, demonic direction that Richard Elson took the character in. He goes on to apply for a job at a coffee shop named the Groovy Train, owned by a black magician cat called Ebony and her mind-reading assistant, Pajamas. They're well aware of Super's past and his potential power, but they try their best to keep him safe and subdued. That's a tough task, because Super is regularly driven to anger by invading villains like Biohazard of Lord Sidewinder's crew, who Super has to deal with without completely losing his cool. Super does lose control on a couple of occasions. In his most serious meltdown during a shopping trip, Super's sinister side prevails and he threatens to destroy Mobius before being calmed down again by Ebony in Pyjamas. Super largely stays out of the limelight and deals with everything quite well, all things considered, until the very tail end of the comic. I've got to be honest, I really like the amnesia part of Super Sonic's overall arc. I know amnesia-related storylines can sometimes come off as lazy writing, and I've read criticisms that Fleetway's writers kind of bottled it and made Super an amnesiac because they wrote themselves into a corner by making Super so unstoppably powerful in the first place. But seeing a softer side to Super, and seeing him effectively hanging out with pensioners or hanging out at a hippie coffee shop, was really endearing for me and a fun inversion of his original characterization. It gives Super a certain level of depth. He's not just an evil killing machine. He wants to be good, he wants to be calm, he wants to be rid of his demons. But, like the Incredible Hulk, he just can't help it sometimes. Of course, it goes without saying that the one Fleetway character more well known than anyone else is Super. So much so that a lot of people think this guy's name is Fleetway. The popularity, as far as I can see, seems to stem from the Sonic fan community's semi-ironic obsession with sinister versions of Sonic. A trend that seemed to be kicked off with the immense popularity of the Sonic.exe horror game. Super Sonic's fanged, devilish side slots perfectly alongside Margin Sonic and Tails Doll as a genuinely unsettling Sonic character, and it's led to an immense amount of fan art, mods, videos and the like of Super existing online. The comics landscape after issue 100 was pretty interesting. For the first time since issue 9, Mobius was no longer under the thumb of Dr. Robotnik, and, spoiler alert, actually never would be again. The immediate post-Robotnik world is quite jubilant following his defeat, and we see a few major changes happen. The Emerald Hill folk return from their exile on the floating island back home. Areas like Chemical Plant Zone are cleaned up and give way to beaches for holidaymakers. Robotnik's fortress in the Metropolis Zone is demolished, and Badnik attacks on Mobius temporarily stop. What's interesting though is that Mobius does experience some growing pains post-Robotnik. For example, Sonic himself expresses some boredom in this new post-Robotnik world, as does Shortfuse, whose heroics are no longer required. Shortfuse applies for a number of menial jobs in Robotnik's absence, before leaving Mobius for more exciting adventures elsewhere. In a more sinister way though, plenty of animal citizens genuinely deeply miss Robotnik and resent the freedom fighters for their role in toppling the dictator. A lot of stories during this time frame involve Drat, the Dr. Robotnik Appreciation Tribe, a secretive Illuminati-style group of Mobians who worship Robotnik and pine for a return by the Doctor. Similarly, Windy Wallace is introduced as a recurring villain at this point, a resentful weather person who launches weather-related attacks on Mobius after their promising engineering career under Robotnik collapses. Also, many of Robotnik's old nefarious zones do continue to operate, now under new management, controlled by criminal gangs or bad dudes like Max Gamble or the Marxio brothers. So things aren't entirely peachy and perfect with Robotnik ousted. In another rather revealing incident, Sonic is forced to play political mediator when two candidates for the role of President of Mobius end up coming to blows in mecha suits. Mobius's transition away from Dr. Robotnik and dictatorship into democracy was anything but smooth, so there's some level of geopolitical realism in Sonic the comic. I think the post-issue 100 atmosphere of the comic contains a surprising amount of nuance, and didn't hurry to depict the post-Robotnik Mobius as an instant paradise. The only question is though, did Fleetway bring Robotnik back too soon? Within a couple of months, Robotnik was already launching attacks on Mobius again from a new secret base. Looking back, it would have been interesting to see the comic go a little longer without Robotnik, just to see how the writers would have filled the considerable void left in his wake. But at least we got a mini break from Dr. Robotnik. I've said quite a few times that in its earlier days the comic boasted plenty of non-Sonic strips that eventually subsided as side Sonic characters got their own strips. Well, it's finally time to explore some of them strips. To be 100% honest with you, at the time, I didn't really enjoy any of these strips nearly as much as the Sonic stuff, even though looking back, a lot of the other Sega strips had better art and more compelling stories than the earlier Sonic strips. If you're familiar with the Mega Drive library, then all of the favourites that you'd expect to see appear in Sonic the Comic. The first strip that springs to mind for me is Shinobi. The Shinobi stories are fantastic to revisit, action-packed with some great art, memorable villains and ninjutsu fun. I've never actually played a Shinobi game, so I can't speak to how faithful the strip is to the games, but it's an enjoyable read, full of kung fu movie tropes. You can't have a Sega comic without some Streets of Rage. I love all three, scratch that, all four Streets of Rage games, but the strip feels like a missed opportunity. It's definitely quite gritty, but it's weird seeing Axel Stone blowing up a truck with a gun and basically killing a bunch of baddies. But the art is kind of flat, and the memorable vaporwave aesthetic of the game's locations and enemies isn't carried over into the strip. There's plenty more, too many to mention individually, but honestly, some of the Sega strips actually scared me as a kid. Prime example, Echo the Dolphin. Echo the Dolphin was surprisingly ubiquitous back in the day, but it had a creepy vibe to it and a claustrophobic atmosphere. The comic's Echo strips, particularly the ones illustrated by Steve White, are honestly beautiful. But seeing Echo get attacked by giant jellyfish, polar bears and xenomorphs really freaked me out as a kid. I always found it quite interesting that a couple of non-Sega strips actually made it into the comic. I was delighted to see a Sparkster strip as a mascot platformer fan who happens to love Rocket Knight Adventures. It's a good old fantasy adventure, wonderfully illustrated and well worth checking out if you have fond memories of the Rocket Knight franchise. I can't believe I've come this far without mentioning Mega Droid. He's a kind of Mega Drive come to life, and he serves as the comic's mascot, who mans the comic's letter pages and stuff like that. He's kind of Sonic the Comic's little equivalent to 2000 AD's Tharg. Mega Droid actually stars in two fourth wall breaking strips, where you get to see a fictional behind the scenes view of Sonic the Comic HQ, which didn't exist. All the comic staff actually worked remotely back then. Ultimately though, the most noteworthy and the best by far ended up being Decapitac, based on the 1991 game of the same name. Ironically, the game isn't very good, and is certainly worse than all the other Mega Drive games I've mentioned here, but the underdeveloped source material allowed plenty of room for Nigel Kitching to write some spooky, Halloweeny adventures. Decapitac was very much Kitching's creative refuge, as he both wrote and illustrated a bunch of the Decapitac strips. The tone was always light and zany, and the strips centered on the inhabitants of Castle Frank N. Stein, mainly the reanimated corpse Chuck and the skull head that he uses to throw at people. It's a genuinely fun little strip, with a light-hearted tone akin to the Groovy Ghoulies or the Addams Family, and Kitching's cartoony art style complements the vibe really well. I've heard that the comic nearly got a Toe Jam and Earl strip. It's a shame it didn't, because I imagine the tone would have been similar to Decapitac. Now, outside of Sonic the Comic, the only other video game comic that Fleetway put out, as far as I'm aware, was a one-off Donkey Kong special. For more info on that, check out this video. If If there's one story arc that makes me more nostalgic than others, it's the comics Sonic 3D adaptation. It's quite ironic. I'm not particularly fond of Sonic 3D as a game, to be honest, and it has a fairly threadbare and forgettable story, but that offered the comic the opportunity to expand on what little there was there and spin a really fascinating yarn. After 5 issues without Robotnik after issue 100, which only accounted for 2.5 months in real time, Sonic and Tails discover a Flicky, which leads them to Flicky's Island. The Flickies are a unique breed, only appearing on Mobius for brief spurts before mysteriously disappearing en masse again. They are in fact dimension hoppers, who use a giant ring to enter and leave Mobius. It's here, on Flicky's Island, that the dynamic duo bump into Robotnik, who's been using the island as his new hideout. He's realised that Flickies make for the perfect batteries for his new breed of more powerful badniks. What is this interdimensional ring that the Flickies use? It's not just for Flickies. An armoured alien creature transports to Mobius via the ring too. He is a Dracon prosecutor, and explains that long ago, Mobius was a distant outpost of the vast Dracon Empire. The ring was built by the Dracon as a litmus test. Whenever anyone figured out how to use it, it signalled that an intelligent threat to the Dracons had developed on that planet. As such, the prosecutor kidnaps Dr. Robotnik. Now what's really interesting is the prosecutor drops a small amulet that Sonic inspects, linking him to a past strip. Remember which one? I've mentioned it in this video.
If this exercise is scrambling your brain, may I suggest a little brain training?
It turns out the sentinel protecting the aquatic ruins zone was actually the work of the Dracons. So the aquatic ruins were built by the Dracon Empire. Anyway, Robotnik manages to broker a deal with the Dracons. He uses his classic charm to blame any incursions on their technology on Sonic. And so, Robotnik pops back to Mobius armed with a new and improved METALLIX robot, this one inspired by Knuckles. This new version of METALLIX is one of the coolest looking characters in Fleetway history. And by the way, this thing predates Sonic R's Metal Knuckles. He opens up a can of whoop-ass on Sonic, knocking him out cold and taking him through the power ring. This is where things get really awesome. The story continues through the power ring and in the home of the Dracon Empire. Sonic is charged with crimes against the Dracon Empire, and the punishment is trial by combat. And Sonic's opponent? METALLIX. The two fight one-on-one, featuring some of Sonic the Comic's most action-packed panels, and it looks like they're evenly matched. I just love this bit of the arc, real Klingon vibes here. Will this gladiatorial combat end in a stalemate? Well, as it turns out, Tails snuck through the power ring too, and he's watching with concern. He helps to give Sonic the edge, luring METALLIX under a heavy metal gate that crushes him, handing Sonic the victory.
Fatality.
Sonic is declared the winner, and thus innocent. And in the aftermath of Sonic's victory, he gets into a fracas with a prosecutor and discovers the Dracon, or at least the prosecutors, are actually fish encased in robotic bodies.
Groovy!
Sonic is finally allowed to leave and return to Mobius, briefly pausing the arc, but things heat up as the Dracon Empire learns of Sonic's intimate relationship with the Chaos Emeralds, which they happen to covet. The Dracons have some Game of Thrones style intrigue going on. The Empire is ruled by 3 houses, but the leader of the House of War, the guy who was responsible for Sonic's trial against METALLIX, hides from the other 2 that he knows who Sonic is and that he's sent Robotnik on a mission to capture both Sonic and the Chaos Emeralds. The thing is though, Robotnik is taking a while. Tired of waiting, the Dracons launch an invasion of the Emerald Hill Zone to try and capture Sonic themselves. Sonic successfully swats away the first wave of Dracon troopers, but he's then faced with the mighty Master Sentinel, which again is no match for Sonic's quick thinking and speedy offense. Grimer, usually loyal to Robotnik, reveals to the Dracons that Robotnik never intended to fetch the emeralds for them. He betrays Robotnik and takes the Dracons to the floating island himself. In a bit of lucky timing, they find the island deserted, with Knuckles off adventuring elsewhere. The island is defended by Sonic and some Guardian robots, but Grimer helps to lead the Dracons directly to the Emerald Chamber. Just as the Dracons finish carefully placing the emeralds in a holding device, the truth comes out. They're suddenly betrayed by Grimer. Yep, Grimer was loyal to Robotnik all along, and betrayed him earlier as a ploy to briefly earn the Dracons' trust. Very clever, guys. Grimer zaps the Dracons back to their own dimension, leaving the emeralds for Robotnik. Robotnik tries to harness the power of the emeralds, but he turns into a giant emerald himself. Not quite the outcome he was hoping for, but still, Robotnik's enjoyed a bit of a power boost and gives Sonic and Knuckles, who arrive to try and save the day, a bit of a scare with his newfound power. Sonic has a bit of a play with the Hidden Palace's central computer, and ends up blasting Robotnik with the power of the Master Emerald. That was a big mistake though, because now Robotnik reaches his apex, attaining godlike powers. Sonic is in trouble. This new ultra-powerful Robotnik uses his newfound power to psychologically torture Sonic. He alters history to show Sonic what would happen to Mobius if he never existed. It's a grim place with no freedom fighters. Sonic's resolve is as strong as ever though, and he vows, even with the odds stacked against him, that he'll still defeat Robotnik. This is one of the comic's grandest moments because it really reveals Sonic's innate drive, his innate heroism, his absolute dedication to toppling Robotnik. Robotnik mocks Sonic further by jumping 65 years into the future. Sonic's an elderly hedgehog and Mobius remains resolutely under Robotnik rule, but still, Sonic vows he'll do whatever it takes to take down Robotnik. This kicks off the comic's most creative sequence of panels. Robotnik transports Sonic to a variety of completely bizarre alternate realities, and in each and every one, Sonic continues his fight against Robotnik and against the odds.
What is a man?
In short, Robotnik just can't get Sonic to give up. Issue 130, which coincides with the comic's 5th anniversary, concludes the long, epic Sonic 3D saga. Robotnik puts Sonic through a gauntlet, forcing him to battle a variety of enemies from his past, including a brainwashed Knuckles. Robotnik's own hubris leads to his downfall. Sonic goads Robotnik, boasting that if only Knuckles were on his side, he'd be able to end Robotnik's reign of terror. A cocky Robotnik allows this team up to happen, but it does lead to his downfall, as Knuckles, the master of the Chaos Emeralds, uses that classic, the Grey Emerald, to zap Robotnik, shrinking him down and seemingly popping him out of existence, saving the day and defeating the most powerful incarnation of Robotnik that Sonic has ever had to contend with. Perhaps, once and for all, Robotnik actually is defeated this time. So far, we've touched on a few of Sonic the Comic's best villains in great detail, but it's worth quickly shining the spotlight on some of the comic's other villains and ne'er-do-wells that I might otherwise not discuss in much detail. Here's a quick-fire list of, in my opinion, the most noteworthy Sonic the Comic villains. Number 1, Metamorphia. One of the comic's most prolific villains, Metamorphia is a female shapeshifter created by Grimer, who does battle with the Freedom Fighters on a number of occasions. Metamorphia's true appearance is rather hideous, but she uses her shape-shifting ability to morph into, among other things, a green hedgehog called Cosmic, who tries to outrun Sonic. Metamorphia also assumes a number of other disguises, a cute little lady, Tails, or an ordinary brown hedgehog. She can also manipulate her body into various different forms of weaponry too. Metamorphia is a bit of a sad figure though, always desperately seeking Robotnik's validation and approval, but never getting it. Number 2, Hobson and Choi. One of the comic's more bizarre duo of villains. Hobson and Choi are a manatee and porcupine pair from an alternate dimension, who end up in Mobius in an attempt to escape arrest elsewhere. Like Knuckles, they're tricked by Robotnik into believing Sonic to be a big villain on Mobius. They decide they have to take on Sonic, but after a quick scuffle, they basically surrender and retreat, never to be seen again. The really curious thing about Hobson and Choi is that apparently they were in contention to become more permanent members of the cast and join the Freedom Fighters. That really wouldn't have worked. These guys just don't quite look the part. In fact, Choi looks like a cursed version of Sonic. Number 3, King Sonic. Everyone loves an alternate version of Sonic, right? Well, here's a great one. Sonic and Amy travel to a mirror dimension where Sonic, not Kinterbor, got caught up in that lab explosion long ago. In this dimension, Sonic rules over Mobius as a dictator with an iron fist, just like Robotnik, or perhaps even worse than Robotnik. King Sonic, of course, has all of Sonic's powers, but he also has an evil empire backing him. So how does good Sonic defeat King Sonic? Well, in a neat twist, when King Sonic turns super, he transforms into a totally mellowed out yellow dude, not the demonic entity that good Sonic turns into. Tekno vows that she'll find a way to keep the king in this mellow yellow mood. Number 4, Old Sonic. Apologies, but allow me to double dip with the Sonic clones. In one issue, an elderly Sonic suddenly appears, claiming to be from a dystopian future and championing a plan to change the course of history to avert disaster. He's basically like Trunks or Cable. The Freedom Fighters are suspicious as to whether this old Sonic actually is Sonic from the future, but his DNA matches present Sonic's. Ultimately though, this poor old Sonic clone turns out to be a pawn created by Robotnik from Sonic's DNA, used to forward one of Robotnik's many schemes. Of course, the scheme doesn't work. The Freedom Fighters end up alright, but this older Sonic clone was dismayed when he found out his true purpose, and found his memories to be fake. His death and transformation into a shining star in the sky is actually quite a poignant moment. Number 5, Nuts and Bolt. One of the more genuinely intimidating members of Tails' own personal rogues gallery. Nuts and Bolt is a hulking gorilla robot with a short temper, an intense hatred of Sonic, and a litany of deadly accessories, including saw blades on his arms. He's defeated by Tails in their first clash, but his skull manages to escape. Nutsan reappears later with a new body, which is made of ice. And guess what? He's looking good.
Oh, damn. I don't want to hear any of that Dan confirmed as furry shit either. That's hot. No matter I don't care if you're in it. That's just hot.
Nutsan's own uncontrollable hot rage, though, melts his new body, which sees him defeated for good. Number 6, Max Gamble. One of the more frequent baddies to pop up in the comic. Gamble is your stereotypical gangster figure. Always immaculately dressed in a nice suit, but always running a nefarious, money-grubbing scheme. Here's just a couple. Gamble takes over Casino Night Zone from Dr. Robotnik and continues to run it as a place to rip off regular Mobians. After Dr. Robotnik is disposed of after issue 100, Gamble continues a working relationship with the Doctor, which disgusts even his gangster buddies. In one particularly sleazy scheme late in the comic, Max Gamble transforms Flicky's Island into a tourist hotspot, inviting regular Mobians to visit the island for an adventure holiday where they're attacked by rogue badniks. Max Gamble is bad news. He's also been depicted by a number of artists, but I think that Rob Corona nailed his look the best. Number 7, Crimson Cobra. Let's end with a fun one. The Crimson Cobra is an enemy of the Chaotix, operating in New Tech City. Although he has a sinister, conniving look in his eyes, he's comically tiny. The Cobra's plan to defeat the Chaotix is quite nifty though. He uses a brain scrambler to turn Vector into a raging dragon, and to turn Mighty into a raging lunatic. After Mighty, Vector and Espio are arrested for brawling with each other, the Cobra's plan to dispose of the Chaotix is ruined when he underestimates Charmy. The Cobra's entire criminal enterprise is bought out by Charmy, leaving the Crimson Cobra penniless and defeated. Don't forget, Charmy is a prince after all. One topic I've touched on elsewhere is the influences on the comic, something that's worth a full expose. The comics writers and artists have explicitly stated many influences. It might be unsurprising to note that the writers and artists of Sonic the Comic have often cited Marvel Comics as being a huge influence on Sonic the Comic, and the comic wears this influence on its sleeve. I mean, take a look at this panel of Sonic's bedroom and tell me how many Marvel references you see. Let's get it all out there and do a little whistle-stop tour of the comic's most Marvel-rific moments, true believers.
Excelsior!
In issue 94, The Bulk, a raging, muscular purple monster with green shorts, is running rampant in the Special Zone. Where did this hulking beast come from? The Bulk started life as nerdy Bob Bobble, a geek who's unlucky in the dating department. He blasts himself with delta rays with the hope of getting a juicier physique, but he's transformed into the Bulk. How is he stopped? The Bulk keeps putting on more and more, well, bulk, until he can no longer move, allowing the heroes to give him a second delta ray blast to turn him back into Bob Bobble. The Bulk's colour scheme is obviously just an inversion of the Incredible Hulk, but it's kind of funny because he looks exactly like the infraggable Krunk from Dexter's Lab, doesn't he? Also residing in the Special Zone is Insect Guy, a former nerd bitten by a radioactive insect who gained incredible powers. We don't actually see much of him though, but we do follow the story of a young boy who's gifted an Insect Guy outfit for Christmas. This young kid dives headfirst into some really dangerous heroics. He's taught an important lesson by Sonic though, who saves his life on a couple of occasions, that sometimes less dangerous heroics, like gifting presents to a local hospital, can be just as noble as web slinging. Incidentally, Sonic's Christmas gift to this young boy? A can of insect repellent. Here's some of my favourite Special Zone denizens, the Z-Monkeys. I'd say the X-Men were just about the hottest superheroes around at the time this strip released, but the Monkeys are depicted as a useless team of egomaniacs who delay any crime fighting in New Tech City to pose, throw out catchphrases, and look tough and brooding, allowing villains to get away and leaving the heavy lifting for Sonic to do. There's one more really fun Special Zone villainous group who battle the Chaotix. Their team name? The Fundamental Four. Get it? No prizes for guessing which Fantastic Four member inspired each one. Finally, we have this later strip, which actually takes place on Mobius, in a zone inhabited by superheroes. See how many superhero parodies you can spot in this single panel alone. In this zone, a convention center has double booked an event for both heroes and villains, which leads to a big old brawl. The chief villain in this strip is Jack-O-Lantern. I would guess he's meant to be a parody of Green Goblin, though there is actually a lesser-known Spider-Man villain who actually goes by the name of Jack-O-Lantern. The more you know. Turns out the double booking was caused by Meteor Destruction Man, who wanted to destroy both the heroes and villains in one fell swoop. With that armor and purple skin, he's giving Thanos vibes. Of course, there's many, many more superheroes and other characters that could be inspired by Marvel characters, but I just wanted to highlight some of the most fun ones. The penultimate story arc in Sonic the Comic is the SHANAZAR arc. Sounds a little different to the other arcs, doesn't it? The SHANAZAR story, to me, represents Sonic the Comic at both its best and its worst. Let me recap and try and explain why. SHANAZAR, as it turns out, is a planet, a subatomic one. After Robotnik's prior disappearance, his dutiful assistant Grimer dedicates his time to figuring out what happened to his master. He deduces that Robotnik didn't simply vanish into thin air, but was shrunken down to the quantum realm. Grimer employs the size manipulation talents of Knack the Weasel to follow in Robotnik's footsteps, shrinking down to a size smaller than an atom to visit the minuscule planet of SHANAZAR. Of course, Sonic manages to follow them after getting hold of one of Knack's shrinking devices for himself. So this is SHANAZAR, an Arabian Nights-inspired world that's very different from Mobius. Sonic gets a less than warm welcome here, when he's confronted by the Imperial Guard. One of the guardsmen summons a powerful genie. Sonic is used to fighting high-tech threats from Robotnik, but he's quite ineffective when faced with more magical threats in SHANAZAR. The genie delivers Sonic his first SHANAZAR beatdown. He passes out and wakes up in the palace dungeon to see two familiar faces, Grimer and Knack. The trio are taken to see the Grand Vizier of SHANAZAR, who Grimer assumes to be Robotnik, as the Vizier is described as another new arrival. To everyone's surprise, the Vizier turns out to be Dr. Kinterbor. The Doctor explains that he was indeed shrunk by Knuckles, but lost consciousness and woke up on the planet as Kinterbor. He found popularity in SHANAZAR after sharing various scientific secrets with the planet's denizens, and was granted the role of Grand Vizier under Princess Capacious, who has an itsy-bitsy crush on Kinterbor. It's never fully explained exactly why Robotnik morphed back into Kinterbor, but remember, he got here after being zapped by a Chaos Emerald, so that must have had an effect. Despite the princess's crush, she tasks Kinterbor and Sonic with a perilous task. They have to go to the Mystic Mountain in the Desert of Eternity. The duo arrive at the Mystic Mountain to find a rather sinister ceremony going on. A group of children are there, as are the wispy spirits of genies. The genies plan to possess the bodies of the children, granting them great power, but greatly reducing their lifespan in return. Sonic, as a hero at heart, feels compelled to stop the ceremony and does battle with the genies. Things go from bad to worse in the cave when Kinterbor finds himself having something of a panic attack. It appears he's needed to continually drink a vial of medicine in order to keep his Robotnik side at bay, but his evil side manages to prevail and do away with the medicine, heralding the return of Robotnik, the new Grand Vizier of SHANAZAR. In the end, Sonic successfully stops the genie ceremony and leads the group of children to safety. Rather than being celebrated as a hero for saving the kids, Sonic is reviled as an outlaw for ruining an ancient ceremony. Even the children feel disgraced and disappointed in Sonic's meddling. Sonic has found himself in a world where his heroism isn't appreciated because it clashes with the culture. Sonic is not really the hero here that he wants to be, and that puts him in a position he's never been in before. In contrast, Robotnik flourishes as the ass-kissing and grovelling Grand Vizier of the Princess. Despite his outlaw status, Sonic does continue his heroics for a little while. He finds himself, for example, freeing slaves from an evil warlock. And in another strip, he teams up with a fellow criminal but refuses to plunder the treasure vault of the princess, despite obviously having motivation to do so. Sonic becomes public enemy number 1 though, a fugitive, appearing on wanted posters and making the people of SHANAZAR nervous by his very presence.
He's just standing there, menacingly!
Sonic's motivation does eventually give out though. In one story, he's hunted by a group of mercenaries who deliver Sonic a beatdown. In what's a first for Sonic, he decides to just run away and leave the main city of SHANAZAR behind, effectively retreating. This, in my opinion, is where the story loses focus. Behind the scenes, Kitching, the mastermind behind the SHANAZAR scripts, was apparently unceremoniously fired after clashing with the comics editor over some creative decisions. Lou Stringer took over, and under him, Sonic's SHANAZAR adventures lose a lot of steam, devolving from a really intriguing and unique story into non-sequitur comic book fodder. After running away, Sonic's wider wanderings of SHANAZAR reveal it to be a world not unlike Mobius with radically different areas. I always felt this revelation was a bit of a shame, because it kind of dissolved the claustrophobic and Arabian atmosphere of SHANAZAR that I was enjoying. During his planetary wandering, Sonic is joined by Amy, who pops out of the Ring of Eternity to help him out. The most notable story of this wandering period is Space Race, where Sonic and Amy travel to a high-tech area of SHANAZAR and get roped into a race against an alien called Turbo, who actually beats Sonic. Eventually though, after some faffing, the main drama picks up again, when Sonic starts getting flashbacks to Knack's shrinking belt, theorizing that some of his memories must have been wiped out by a sorcerer to make him forget how to escape the planet. Sonic decides that it's finally time to find the belt and get out of here, but Robotnik has other plans. He and Grimer are working on an ambitious machine that they hope will merge SHANAZAR and Mobius together, leaving Robotnik as the ruler of this new blended world. Issue 165 marks the end of the SHANAZAR arc, as the machine boots up, kicking off the planetary merge. The result, however, is not as devastating as Robotnik had planned. The two planets do combine into one, but they don't cause the damage that Robotnik anticipates. After a crazy adventure, Robotnik has lost once again, and the status quo is restored. Well, kind of, because now Mobius is larger than ever before, and SHANAZAR's various zones, villains, and heroes are now part of Mobius too. In all honesty, at the time, I disliked how different the SHANAZAR stuff felt from the games, and I disliked the fact that the arc felt so, for lack of a better term, lonely, with no Tails, Knuckles, or anyone really, besides Sonic and Amy. But rereading the comic for this video, I enjoyed how different and dark it all was. Ultimately though, the arc really was ruined by the change of writing staff halfway through. I'm left wondering how Nigel Kitching would have continued to write Sonic's time in SHANAZAR. One can only wonder, but his work was good while it lasted.
That was tight!
It's finally time to talk about one of my favourite topics. Our home, the pale blue dot, Earth. In Sonic the Comic, Earth is an entirely separate planet to Mobius that exists in a parallel dimension. How do we know? Because Sonic and the Freedom Fighters visit Earth, multiple times in fact. In the inaugural visit, Amy and Tekno are on their way back to Mobius from a deep space adventure, piloting an actual UFO-type vehicle when they crash land on planet Earth. Amy and Tekno do find their way back to Mobius with the help of a kindly Einstein-esque doctor before anything bad happens, but not before rousing the suspicion of Colonel Granite, an overzealous colonel in the British Armed Forces. Two things that are rather cute about this initial visit are that Amy sees an actual hedgehog. Also, after this brief visit, Tekno actually makes a video game based on Earth where you play as humans. Sonic the Comic's Earth, though, isn't so different from Mobius in the sense that it's a very fantastical place. For example, in their next visit to Earth, Amy and Tekno end up in Kansas in 1870, which is teeming with cowboys, but also with robots. The robots are the handiwork of none other than Colonel Granite again, who's built a time-traveling machine and is hatching a plan to invade the past to alter the course of Earth's history. His plan is foiled when Amy and Tekno destroy his machine. Earth and Mobius' relationship reaches a bit of a low point in issue 146 when Colonel Granite, who's been plotting a raid of Mobius since his time travel plans were abruptly halted, actually launches a New Year's Eve invasion of planet Mobius. This time Sonic is involved with all of the antics too, When attempting to battle against the Colonel and his forces, Sonic is transported to Earth via their transportation portal. More precisely, he's transported to the New Year celebrations taking place in Trafalgar Square in London. Seeing Sonic explore London is a brief but really fun time. My favourite, by far, of the Earth-based strips. He even meets who I assume is Tony Blair, Prime Minister at the time of publication. Sonic all too quickly makes his way back to Mobius via a dimensional portal hidden in Scotland. It takes him 5 minutes to go from London to, I guess, the Scottish Highlands. I bet some math whiz kids out there could work out roughly how fast Sonic was moving with that info. Anyway, Sonic returns to Mobius and a sudden, lucky storm ends up sending Granite back to Earth and destroying his portal. He's arrested back on his home planet and never heard from again. The rest of the Earth-based strips are equally unhinged. Amy and Tekno travel to ancient Greece and help Hercules defeat the Minotaur. Sonic and Amy visit both an ancient Egypt inhabited by alien gods and an Easter island patrolled by Moai statues. And Sonic also revisits America to assist a tribe of Native Americans. For his efforts, he's immortalized in totem pole form. For what it's worth though, I'm not a huge fan of most of the Earth strips. I would have loved to see Sonic exploring Earth, and more specifically somewhere like London, just for 1 or 2 more strips. There's so much potential there. Now, it's worth noting one thing. Most American Sonic media in the 90s set the action on the fictional planet of Mobius, but when Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2 released, the Japanese law overrode any American and British law, and the action took place on an obviously fictionalized version of Earth. As an old school kind of guy who was very much influenced by Fleetway, I like the idea of Mobius and Earth being entirely separate entities that maybe occasionally meet.
Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
Remember when I talked about Amy being dropped from the comic's main strip to star in her own adventurer strip with Tekno? Well, her most prominent string of stories were the Ring of Eternity adventures. Very suddenly, in issue 134, an entity known as the Ring of Eternity is introduced, unearthed in an icy zone. The ring, as we later find out, was constructed by an ancient race of space-travelling, terraforming dinosaurs who visited Mobius millennia ago and built and used the ring to travel the universe with ease. Anyway, for the next dozen or so issues of the comic, the ring assigns Amy and Tekno various tasks. They travel the universe, or more accurately travel the Fleetway multiverse, being spat out at random locations in time and space to complete one-story mini-adventures. What sort of tasks did the ring have in mind for Amy and Tekno? Well, how about intervening in a war between a bunch of puppets and aliens, exploring the gigantic laboratory of this guy that looks exactly like Savage Dragon, and helping this adventurous young lady on her fantastical quest for treasure in a Dungeons & Dragons-esque world. This kind of anything-goes, one-off storytelling can make the strips feel a little disposable at times, but it does add a fun spark of variety to the comic, particularly when the main Sonic strip is engaged in a hulking, longer-running story arc with a serious tone. I'm glad the comic made room for both styles of storytelling. Anyway, on their first encounter with the ring explains to the ladies that Mobius serves as an important and powerful dimensional crossroads to many other worlds, which I guess does explain away the fact that Sonic and the squad have visited just about every corner of the universe at this point. The Ring of Eternity stories drew to a close in issue 156. Amy and Tekno visited a distant world controlled by a familiar face, Max Gamble. Max had followed the duo through the Ring of Eternity to evade Mobian forces on his tail. They meet Gamble in a film noir style gangster world, but they end up reprimanding him and bringing him back to Mobius. But word spread about the universe hopping potential of the ring. When Amy, Tekno and Max arrive back on Mobius, they find a crowd of people wanting to use the ring to travel. A riot breaks out when pop star Fabian Vane seeks to use the ring to go on a universe-spanning music tour. After being smashed during the fracas and then reconstructed, the ring declares Amy and Tekno's long journey to be over. And from then on, the ring kind of takes on the role of a Mobius version of the Omniviewer, occasionally being used by Amy and others to conveniently dimension hop around. It's time to touch on one of the sadder aspects of this video, the slow, depressing death of Sonic the Comic. In the comic's heyday, it was brimming with content. Slowly but surely though, budget cuts scraped away original content from the comic. First to go were the news pages and later the game reviews. Not the biggest loss in the world because at the end of the day, the reviews were basic and, well, some of the review scores were a little generous to say the least. I'm not sure Bubsy 2 deserves that score.
What could possibly go wrong?
Then the amount of original strips was reduced, with reprints beginning to pad out the comic. By the latter half of the SHANAZAR arc, the comic had been reduced to just one original strip, with the rest of the comic being reprinted strips from years gone by. As a longtime fan, this was immensely disappointing. The comic became less value for money, and characters like Knuckles and Tails, who played no part in the SHANAZAR arc, disappeared for literally months on end. I've read that Fleetway's finance department encouraged the comic to start with the reprints. Adding reprints to comics is something of a British tradition, but it's always the death knell of a comic book. Ultimately, when the decision was made, the staff saw the writing on the wall. For example, Deborah Tate passed on Rob Corona's details to 2000 AD when the comic started cutting content, and Lou Stringer gave us his most dramatic story yet, wanting to sneak it in before the comic inevitably ended.
Yeah, I think we all knew that the Sonic was nearing its end, didn't we? Yeah. Because the usual thing with Egmont is that they put reprints in, the same as they did with Buster and Wizard and Chips and all the other comics. You know, to save money, they put reprints in, so you could see that this comic isn't going to last long in its current form. So we wanted to build up Robotnik and build up to a climax with him.
Nevertheless, I've read that the higher-ups at Fleetway believed that the reprinted strips wouldn't harm the comic too much, believing that older fans of the comic might have grown out of it, giving way to a wave of younger Sonic fans who hadn't read the strips before. Apparently the target demographic for the comic was always kids aged 5 to 10, so that logic seems kind of sound. Ultimately though, this strategy, in my opinion, feels naive, because as new Sonic games continue to be released, Fleetway's strategy of leaning on reprinted strips made the comic feel old, out of date and behind the times. Kids want to read stuff that's new, relevant and current, and that's increasingly not what Sonic the Comic was offering. It's so disappointing that this really was the beginning of the end for Fleetway and Sonic the Comic, but hey ho, it was. After Kitching's initial firing, Lou Stringer took over writing duties for the comic before Kitching returned for the comic's final, bombastic story arc. Before we get on to that, let's just quickly discuss how Stringer bridged the gap between SHANAZAR and the final arc, because it serves as kind of a precursor to the Sonic Adventures storyline. A defeated post-SHANAZAR Robotnik is fed up. Robotnik has changed from wanting to rule over Mobius to wanting to simply destroy it, and so he builds a machine that allows him to absorb Mobius's power. Robotnik becomes ultra powerful, while Mobius becomes unstable and riddled with natural disasters. On this occasion, Robotnik is defeated by Shortfuse, who manages to plug himself into Robotnik's new machine, which simultaneously depowers Robotnik and destroys Shortfuse's armor once and for all. The story concludes with Shorty leaving the superhero life behind, while Robotnik, well, he's left feeling grumpier than ever.
Look, Pim, I know it's our job to help this guy and everything, but I think this guy's a lost cause. He's obviously made up his mind. Why don't we just cut our losses and get out of here?
Which leads us neatly onto the Sonic Adventures story. A bunch of characters experience minor redesigns and tweaks to their look to bring them in line with the game. This is all very bittersweet for me, because in some ways, this feels like a new beginning. In the first Sonic Adventure issue, a new villain, Chaos, launches an attack on Metropolis City Zone, and Sonic and the Freedom Fighters are dispatched to take care of it. You'll notice that Chaos has that distinct Richard Elson look to his design, with a pretty scary face and signature tusks. He also has a very unique and interesting power here. Chaos can strike fear into the heart of onlookers, a power that threatens to stop Sonic dead in his tracks. During their initial scuffle, Sonic musters up enough courage to charge right through the watery creature, resulting in his eyes being dyed green by Chaos energy. We later learn that Grimer was responsible for releasing Chaos, hoping to cheer Robotnik up. Unfortunately for Grimer, releasing Chaos wasn't a great idea, because Robotnik reveals that he doesn't know how to stop nor control Chaos, but he's in a nihilistic enough mood to enjoy watching Chaos run wild. For the Freedom Fighters' second clash with the monster, Porker Lewis arrives with a gizmo designed to trap him. Said gizmo ends up with a loose wire during the battle. Sonic is just too frozen with fear to plug the wire back in, but heroic Johnny Lightfoot jumps in to help. He rewires everything and the gizmo does its job, seemingly destroying Chaos. But in the process, Johnny is assaulted by Chaos. And guess what? He dies. Yes, Johnny actually dies. For good. It's a dark and surprisingly emotional moment in the comic. The whole string of events, Johnny's death and his own fear when faced with Chaos, triggers nightmares in Sonic, who understandably struggles with guilt over the death of one of his close friends. It's now personal. But Chaos doesn't give the good guys a breather. He reappears on the floating island and starts absorbing Chaos Emeralds, becoming even more powerful. Knuckles, the protector of the floating island, is also frozen with fear when confronted with Chaos and completely unable to stop him. Chaos absorbs one Chaos Emerald, but Knuckles is able to gather enough strength to scatter the others across Mobius, triggering the floating island to start falling. It hurtles downwards and fully sinks into the ocean this time around. This is where things get weird. Sonic's green eyes give him the power to see the ghostly image of Tikal, an ancient echidna from the distant past. She zaps Sonic and transports him thousands of years into Mobius's past. We get to see the ancient civilization of the echidnas, which includes Knuckles and a bunch of dinosaurs. This is the echidnas at the height of their power, but it's not long before an old enemy, a Dracon prosecutor, turns up. You see, the Dracon Empire are in a state of war with the echidnas. Sonic reveals to the echidnas that the prosecutor is in fact an easily defeatable fish, so they keep the fish in a kind of koi pond. Sonic ponders on why Knuckles is here in the past, suggesting that he might have entered into a state of suspended animation at some point, explaining why he's still around thousands of years in the future. Then, Sonic meets Pocha Kamak. I probably destroyed and butchered that pronunciation, who offers a laudum. He says the echidnas quarried a collection of sacred emeralds long ago, that the Dracons then stole and imbued with Chaos energy, creating the Chaos Emeralds. The echidnas stole the newly empowered emeralds back, which triggered this conflict. So why did Sonic get brought here? Because of a weird echidna prophecy. Pocha Kamak has the ability to see into the future, and saw Sonic as Mobius's greatest hero. Once Sonic Eyes turned green, the ancient echidnas were able to locate him in history and bring him back to help fight off the Dracons. Then we learn about the origin of Chaos too. The Dracon soldiers launch an assault on the echidna's Chaos Emerald chamber and end up firing at the emeralds, causing a massive Chaos energy explosion. The Chaos energy merges with the fishy prosecutor to form the beast known as Chaos. In a last gambit, Poacher Kamak sends Sonic back to the future using the power of the Chaos Emeralds, a move which also significantly weakens Chaos and, I assume, makes him dormant until future events begin to unfold. Back in the future, shit hits the fan. Nihilistic Robotnik helps Chaos to absorb the remainder of the Chaos Emeralds, turning him into perfect chaos. He's simply too powerful for the Freedom Fighters to handle, but then, who arrives on the scene but Super Sonic? Super, starved of chaos energy for so long, is being shepherded by Ebony. He's weak and frail, maybe too weak to save the day. Well, no, Super's proximity to chaos energy allows him to overpower Chaos and absorb all of Chaos's power for himself, reducing perfect chaos to a little fish. Chaos ends up being dumped into a body of water near good old Big the Cat. But this presents a new, final problem though, as Super turns evil one more time. Ebony seemingly helps Super to finally defeat Sonic by having Super absorb Sonic, but then Super's rage subsides. For the first time in well over 100 issues, Super and Sonic re-merge into one entity again, with Sonic, at least for now, back in control. And that is how the comic ends, with the Freedom Fighters victorious, Chaos and Super Sonic vanquished, and Johnny Lightfoot avenged. A fitting final story, dramatic, dark, brooding, but at the same time, rather sadly, filled with promise for the future.
Yes!
And that, unfortunately, is it. After the Sonic Adventure arc wrapped up, the comic drew to a sudden and ignominious end. It was a shame, because the Sonic Adventure arc kind of felt like a new beginning, introducing some new characters and giving old ones a visual revamp. Also, if you're wondering why Johnny died, Kitchinger said Johnny was dull and boring, so presumably he was the perfect candidate for a dramatic kill-off. A bold way to end the comic, to be fair. Plenty of loose ends were left dangling. Most prominently, I always wondered what the deal was with Knuckles being present in the past, but alas, we'd never find out, because the comic suddenly died without warning. Well, that's not entirely truthful. Issue 185, the issue released after the Sonic Adventure arc ended, consisted solely of reprinted strips, with the only new material being the cover art by Richard Elson and 3 pages of letters and fan art. The comic continued to limp on for another 38 issues, offering no new strips until its final issue, 223, released at the tail end of 2001. It featured a retrospective written by Nigel Kitching to officially see the comic off as it ceased publication. Even I, as a loyal Sonic the Comic fanboy, stopped buying the comic after about issue 187. Like I said earlier, the decision to lean so heavily on reprints was a foolish mistake by Fleetway. Sonic Adventure 2 had already been released by the time the last issue came out, but Fleetway of course missed the opportunity for a Sonic Adventure 2 tie-in. The reprinting was all done presumably for money-saving purposes, but considering how Sonic the Comic still has a fanbase online, and considering how long the sister comic by Archie lasted, it all seems especially wasteful that Fleetway effectively sabotaged their own comic with this decision. Without the reprints, there's no telling how long the comic could have lasted. But to be fair, I'm not privy to Fleetway's financial circumstances circa 2001, so maybe the comic's demise would have happened with or without the reprints. And that closes the door on this Sonic the Comic retrospective. Ultimately, if you're sad about Sonic the Comic's downfall, there's no need to be. The Sonic the Comic fanbase is remarkably strong, considering the comic hasn't existed for over 20 years now. In fact, it feels like Sonic the Comic is more popular now than it's been for a long time. We can thank the internet for that. It'd be disingenuous to ignore the immense impact Friday Night Funkin' has had on Sonic the Comic 2. Friday Night Funkin' mods of Super Sonic and Extra Life have further signal boosted the comic to a wider audience. But here's a final interesting question. What impact has Fleetway had on wider Sonic media? Well, here's one little thing. Tekno, Ebony, Shortfuse and Metamorphia all cameoed in the American Archie comics. Plus, one of the Echidna Guardian robots cameoed in the current IDW comic book too. Most prominently, it's been confirmed that the Metal Sonic boss fight in Sonic Mania was inspired by Emperor METALLIX, which is pretty cool. I've also seen rumours that Sonic's disguise in the second Sonic movie is a little nod to Bob Beakey, but that's never been confirmed. If you genuinely can't get enough Fleetway and want even more, here's a few recommendations. First, check out Sonic the Comic Online, the unofficial fan continuation of the comic that launched not long after the demise of the official comic. And Sonic the Comic contributors like Nigel Kitching and others have written and illustrated Sonic the Comic Online strips. Also, everyone should check out the Sonic the Comic The Podcast. It's a hilarious, issue-by-issue deep dive into Sonic the Comic, and it's made by passionate fans. Finally, keep an eye on Sonic Villains, a fan film that looks to combine villains from various different Sonic games, comic books, and TV series. Super Sonic and Tekno are set to play an important part in it, and it looks fantastic from what I've seen so far. If you made it this far, congratulations, and thank you for sticking with me. Sonic the Hedgehog is great. I'm passionate about the little guy, evidently. But to be honest, I owe a lot of that passion to my obsession following Sonic the Comic in the good old 1990s. I want to extend a sincere thank you to all of the writers, artists, editors, colorists, and letterers who made the comic what it was, and who inflamed my passion for Sonic the Hedgehog. As always, folks, thank you so much for watching. Believe me, it'll be a shorter one next time, so I hope to see you then. Take it easy.